We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H., and this week I am here with...
Lee Overstreet pinch hitting once again as the world is crazy.
Yeah. Like I say, we try to keep things fairly lighthearted around here. We laugh to keep from crying quite often.
That's right.
But do have to start on a pretty serious, pretty down note. Last week, of course, we were seeing the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, which definitely wrought all kinds of disaster upon Tom and his family. We say, the people are all okay, and that is by far the most important thing.
Yes.
But as far as property damage, damage to all of their belongings that were in their house, which did flood terribly during Hurricane Helene, that was really, really bad. So Tom has been pretty much missing from the internet for this past week, as we would expect. The few little updates that I have had from him, trying to remove as much wet items and that from the house, which itself got soaked, 3.5 feet of water or so that got in. But as if you're listening in the future, you might look back on history, and we're crossing our fingers that some kind of miracle happens, but there is currently Hurricane Milton, a Category 5 hurricane, barreling its way eastward across the Gulf of Mexico right towards the west coast of Florida there, where Tom and his house and his family are located.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, so they have evacuated. Once again, the people should all be safe. Fingers crossed for that beyond anything else, but the likelihood seems very, very, very high that their house will be hit again. So all of last week, Tom let me know that it was quite the unreasonable headache, because you would think you got your house insurance, they're aware that you've just been hit by one hurricane, a second hurricane is coming. So why not survey the damage after the second hurricane and decide what you're going to do insurance-wise at that point? But that isn't how administration things work. That isn't how red tape works. Instead, you have your insurance that says, well, we're going to restore you to the condition that you were in prior to the disastrous event. So insurance claim number 1 should restore them to pre-Hurricane Helene conditions, but insurance claim number 2 is only going to pay to restore them to post-Hurricane Helene conditions, because they have to stack the insurance claims that way.
Well, I guess if restoring them to pre-Helene, that should be restoring them to normal.
It would be that's the first insurance claim,
right?
But that
he
will
had just gotten back to normal recently from Hurricane. Was it Ida? What was it? It was 2 years ago. There was
forgetting
a hurricane
at this point. Yeah,
it's unbelievable how many times it just.
I know.
I don't know what to say, man.
Heaven knows how long this is going to take. But yeah, I mean, the idea is the insurance claim they make post-Milton will be to get them back to where they were post-Helene. And then
so do they come destroy your house?
I guess so. I mean, you would think
they charge you money to bring your house back down. That's just insane.
Yeah, you'd think all being under the same insurance that you could be a little bit more reasonable than that. But point being, Tom spent all of last week having to document very carefully every corner of their currently destroyed from Helene house, so that the second insurance claim that we're expecting after Milton will be able to restore it to that condition before the first insurance claim comes in and takes it from there back to pre-Helene. Right? I mean, obviously, in reality, I don't think that's how it's actually going to work, but I mean,
it won't.
Yeah, administratively, that's what the insurance wants to do. So,
yes.
As if there weren't enough things to think about already and stress to worry about, having to try and document the current destructive level of your house and belongings so that the second insurance claim is only going to get you back to that point.
I will say he's doing the
nuts.
right thing, though, because as someone who has done insurance, I can tell you, like any sort of big corporation or government agency, if you just give them information in the manner they need it.
That's right.
So that somebody can type what they need to type into the right fields. If you just make it easy for them, usually things will go well. Just so call up and be pleasant and just ask them how they want it, no matter how stupid it is. Give it to them like that.
But timeline documented. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Here's how things were and when. And
as an absolute anxiety monster myself, I feel so bad for Tom because I don't know how I would react. I really don't. At some point, I think I would finally cross over the edge into just dark laughter.
Well, yeah, that's what tends to happen.
I imagine he's there knowing his personality. There's got to be some of that has happened. And I just hope they're...
Because honestly, what can you do? I mean,
not much.
You know, in the face of a hurricane, you're not going to... There's no amount of preparation at this point for Milton that's going to, save anything. So... Yeah.
Not really. Well, I guess, in fact, I mean, is that an upside? That was have to prep much. Yeah.
Tom did have a little bit of gallows humor that he shared with me because he's like, well, maybe Hurricane Milton will be so bad that there'll just be nothing left on the property, and then you really can just start from scratch. That would actually be in some ways easier than trying to repair the remains of something that's all damaged and waterlogged but left behind, and you're trying to repair that while, I don't know, saving 2 rafters from the roof, because that'll save so much money.
Exactly. So, and his house is very cool, by the way. I've been there a couple times, and it's just a cool house. I like the layout, and his home theater is just so cool. So I just feel bad all the way around. It's very stressful. And last week, I was supposed to be on with you.
Right. Yes.
But I couldn't because just as you called, I was calling an ambulance for my mother.
Oh, my goodness. I'm so sorry, Lee.
It's okay. She went through a leg surgery to bypass a clogged artery. And then afterwards, lots of complications. And I have lots of complaints for the hospital and doctor not telling us what it was going to be like. And it was beyond what she should have been handling at home. And she got an infection, had to go back to the hospital. Now she is across town in a skilled nursing facility, rehab, getting back her strength and getting one of the wounds treated that got infected. So she's in a safe place and she's progressing and she should get back to normal walking mom. And so my stress level's done kind of okay over the past couple days, except sometimes she's just being mom. And I texted her earlier and said, can I bring you anything today? And she said, yes, Coke and Cheetos.
All right. Well,
okay, Mom.
That seems obtainable.
She doesn't seem to understand how the food affected her health in the first place. But okay, that's a reasonable request. She wants something she's used to. So she's in pretty good spirits given the situation.
Good.
And I've kind of come around to not feeling insane.
That'll help your spirits in turn, I'm sure. So.
Yeah, I hope so.
So with that, I will say,
let's do a show.
Yes, Lee, thank you for being here. And I want to thank Joe Klusnick for filling in last week on Lee Overstreet short notice, because he got to experience
short.
He got to experience what Lee has been experiencing for the past 10 years. Yeah. So now you know, Joe. That's the way things can be around here. But yes, I mean, thank yous to everybody, because there has been a lot of support. We're going to have many, many people to thank in the listeners of the week, because Tom has been updating me just via quick text messages throughout the week to mention the people who have been sending in financial support via PayPal, as I mentioned last week. But we will do that in that section. So to get things started around here, to let you know, because we needed a little momentary vent session, kind of collect our emotions and thoughts while we get into
centered,
this.
Rob, I'm getting centered.
That's right. This is a home theater podcast, ostensibly. That's what we are around here. So we are AVRant. We are your home theater and AV questions answered. And to get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask them. And you ask them by sending them to us via email. Our email address is question@avrant.com. That is by far the best way to get in touch with us. And we answer all the questions that come into our email, first in, first out. It's a fantastic organizational system. So question@avrant.com. That is the place to send your questions, you can, of course, find our website, which is, surprise, surprise, avrant.com. And there you will see show notes for every single episode that has ever been posted on that website. The audio is right there embedded. You can listen to it that way if you want to. And we have links to the products and the articles that we talk about. We have links to our Flickr albums where you can see the images that we might reference. If you'd like to see those images in sort of real time while we're discussing them, come to youtube.com/AVRant. That's our YouTube channel, and you can see Lee and I talking to each other via Skype this week with our very old lower third that we need to replace at some point because it's got Lee's old contact information, which is, well, you want to give that out? You remember your old one.
Yeah, originally I was using my Twitter handle @Lee Overstreet. And nowadays, they changed the name to X. I'm not. What are you going to do? I had I had what I thought was a clever name.
Yeah, Lee over X really just doesn't work as a pun in this case.
No, it would not make any sense. No. It doesn't make it. X is the dumbest name anyone's ever given any entity whatsoever. So and also I got more into EVs, electric cars, and energy stuff. And I created an account called Tesla Lusa because I'm in Tuscaloosa and I bought a Tesla. And that was back when it was cool to buy a Tesla.
Right.
And so I'm still using it though because I met some good people there and I do get a lot of good information there. So if you're interested on either Twitter, I refuse to call it X, or Threads, I am Tesla Lusa regularly on both of those, and you can find me there. But easiest to get a hold of me if you are an AVRant listener that want to talk to me about AVRant stuff is just email at lee@avrant.com.
That's right. 10 years of waiting, and it finally came around, so lee@avrant.com will reach Mr. Lee Overstreet. And, of course, we have our individual email addresses. I'm rob@avrant.com, and Tom is tom@avrant.com. We're on Facebook as well, facebook.com/AVRant podcast. And if you want to find me on any of the social medias, if I'm there, I will be @FirstReflect. That'll be my handle. So if you search for that and it doesn't show up, I'm not on that service. Simple as that. Because if I'm there, that'll be my handle. Yeah, with all that, hey, I mean, anything to catch up on, you let us know behind the scenes, family health-wise, and at least that's on the going in the right direction now. But was there anything else we should catch up on before we get into our regular segments here, Lee?
My mind right now is really just on trying to stay cool, remind myself Mom's going to be okay. Yeah. I'm trying not to worry about Tom in that situation. Also, I have other people I like down there. I have a couple of friends in the Tampa area aside from Tom and in Orlando. Yeah. And so, but we can't help that right now. I'm just looking out a window in this room, looking at the beautiful, beautiful day outside. It is 22 degrees Celsius. Figure that out in Fahrenheit. And it's blue sky, and it feels so good. So, you know what? All I'm worried about right now is just having a little fun on a podcast, man.
That's what we're going to do. That is what we're going to do for sure. And yeah, with that, why don't we go into our normal starting segment? What we watched for you a little bit more than just the past week. You can let us know what you've been watching recently, Lee, and we'll try to get into our more happy mood that we normally try to convey on this podcast here.
Absolutely. So because of all the distractions in life, I haven't been watching a lot of movies, but I never miss football if I can help it, right? Because I'm a University of Alabama football fan, Roll Tide.
You sure
and so
are.
You can imagine the ups and downs if you know anything about American college football. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been watching some wild football in what ESPN and YouTube TV call enhanced 720p.
Wow.
I think since the last time I was, wow. Well, it helps. Look, the last time I was on here, they didn't have this yet. And I complained about the really crappy quality 720p because ESPN is 720p along with many other networks. Yeah. And 720p is 60 FPS for the motion, especially. I mean, you can see why ESPN would have chosen that back in the day.
Yeah, instead
versus
of 1080i.
1080i 60.
Yeah, well, 30 frames, but 60 fields. Yeah, but interlaced. Yes. Yeah, so that was the choice.
And that's I had to learn about interlaced fields several years ago. That each field is a separate image. Yes. So two fields don't add together to one image.
Not necessarily. They are temporally displaced by a 60th of a second.
That's right. And so when you convert interlaced to non-interlaced, you have to convert each field to its own frame.
That's right.
And so it's a weird world when you get into it, especially when you get into old analog video, which I love so much. So I watched a game where we improbably beat the #1 team, and it was the craziest up and down. We did great, then we did terrible, then we won it at the last second. And then the next week, even more improbably, lost as the #1 team to a tiny little team. Got our butts kicked.
They were looking past them to the next game. That happens with them. The team sometimes is very common in sports.
That's right. So this team had not beaten us in their stadium since 1976. That's how improbable this was. So, like, I've been up and down, but enhanced 720p. Thank you, YouTube TV. Thank you very much, because there is a noticeable difference. They upped the bit rate.
They upped the bit rate. That's what I would guess. I mean, what else could be enhanced about 720p other than just upping that bit rate a little bit there?
But so much better, like noticeably better. So it almost looks, 1080p, so much clearer. And then the other things I've noticed video-wise this week have been HDR related. We're trying to sneak HDR into places where it's not particularly useful. TikTok has HDR now.
Okay.
And I couldn't believe it, and I wish I could turn off HDR on my phone, because HDR on a phone is just stupid. I can't imagine. If I want to see something in that high a quality, I'm not going to stare at a 5 or 6 inch screen in my hand.
I mean, I've been on the move, and I've watched some stuff on like Disney Plus in HDR, and you are by, like, if you want accuracy to the image, supposed to turn that screen brightness all the way to its maximum, and that'll get you the actual correct PQEOTF, the electro-optical transfer function. Those nits will actually, honestly, well, I mean, I'm on an iPhone, or an iPhone Pro, in fact, 14 Pro, which is after iOS 18, no battery life left, because they just love to make you want to upgrade for no real reason. But yes,
exactly.
The iPhone Pros, like, their OLED screens are actually genuinely quite accurate when it comes to showing video images and that. So turn that screen brightness all the way up, and HDR is pretty good there. Pretty reference.
On my Samsung, the picture is pretty spectacular, especially given a phone. But the thing is, when I'm looking at my phone, I'm never in a situation where I can make use of HDR. I'm never in like a perfect light control.
Right, yes.
And the screen is small, and so there I am. I have to take my glasses off to see up close anyway.
The actual nit difference between the darkest thing just above black and the brightest highlight. You'd rather have that, like, light dynamic range compressed so that you can see it more easily, because otherwise, your environment has to be just right, or blacks get crushed.
Right, and further, if you turn the brightness all the way up to enjoy HDR in some fashion, now I'm burning more battery.
You sure are.
It's a phone. I'm not watching long movies looking at the high picture quality of my phone. So I could not, I looked around, I couldn't find something that said never do HDR in my menu system.
Okay.
I'll look again, but if anybody knows if there's a way to say don't do HDR, phone, then I'd like to turn that off. And then YouTubers are starting to do more HDR, I've noticed. Some people I watch, because they've made it very easy on iPhones.
That's right.
It's also pretty easy on Android if you have a nice one. But they just figure got to do the latest thing, 4K HDR.
Yeah, to shoot in HDR on your phone now is pretty easy. Yeah, you just set
trivial.
your camera settings. That's what you want to do when you capture video, and there it is, ready to go.
But to do it well, you do need 10-bit, right?
Yep.
To really do it well. And then on top of that, phone sensors and lenses do terribly in low light. And so people are not lighting themselves well. There'll be people sitting in their car. So I'm watching stuff about EVs, for instance. And then somebody's in their car and they're aiming their phone at themselves. And it's just the grainiest, blockiest thing you've ever seen. Then they step out of their car into the light and it looks okay. Don't use HDR where it doesn't matter. You're just making everything more difficult. So there's my, it is AVRant, right? There's my rant.
Is. Okay.
HDR has its place, and it should be when you're watching a movie on a screen where you can enjoy it.
I do also think that when they're doing live broadcasts where they're shooting in HLG, so there's no metadata on HLG, no post-production needed. It's just pretty much a straight camera, gamma for the standard dynamic range section, and then logarithmic curve for the HDR section. That's the hybrid log gamma. That's exactly what the
most
HLG
YouTubers seem to be doing, because that seems to be what's happening.
Well, far less editing that you have to do after the fact. So it would make sense to shoot in that format if you can. But that for live sports, I think, like soccer games that are shot in HLG, that's worthwhile. Yeah, so it's not only pre-made movies, but
absolutely. I didn't mean to imply that it was only movies where you would enjoy. I would enjoy it on a TV show, or especially on sports. I have seen some HDR football, and it's amazing. So what I mean is, it isn't useful in a situation where I'm more worried about battery life, and I can't make the most of it with my human eyes on a tiny screen. So that's where I want to be able to avoid HDR.
Well, with that, I did watch a couple of shows this week. I'm just continuing on with The Penguin. Not to belabor it, but my goodness, is it good? Oh, it's so good. It's such a good show. I mean, it's all about the act. I mean, the writing's really good too. They've done such a good job of coming up with inventive, surprising, but it makes sense after the fact. Like the Penguin is so fast on his feet, so quick thinking in how he plays off these dangerous situations that he gets into, so good at talking his way out of things. And I'm like, it's really well written, because it doesn't come across as hokey. It's acted so well, it's portrayed so well that it's believable, but it's also still surprising. It's not what I would think to say, but he plays it off perfectly. Episode 3 really focused on his sort of, henchman that he's grooming, this Victor character. Got a bit more backstory on him, and it's just, oh, it's such a good show.
Okay. Isn't that fun when you come across one when you weren't expecting it to be that good, especially?
Yeah. I mean, it is HBO, but, with the way everything has been gutted over at HBO these past couple of years after Zaslav came in, it was like, it's questionable if they were going to keep that quality up, but they definitely have on the Penguin. So I'm super happy about
HBO,
that.
so I should maybe look, even though anything comic book related is not normally my thing.
If they didn't ever say Gotham, you would have no idea that this has anything to do with a comic book. It is not at all comic booky whatsoever. This is like I mentioned before, we had versions of Batman that we've called grounded before. Like, this is the most grounded I've ever seen a Gotham portrayal, and there's no mention of Batman. That's not going on. So yeah,
you remember me saying my main problem with comic book related stuff is that I don't have the patience to understand all the background and watch 800 episodes. All right, if I need no background and it's as good as you say, and I have HBO, that might be something I need to look at.
If you have seen Matt Reeves's The Batman, that does fill in what events occurred prior to this series, The Penguin. So you'll have a little bit more depth, but they cover enough right at the beginning of episode 1 to let you know what just happened to the city of Gotham, and this is where we're beginning. And so you can absolutely just jump right in. So the movie that I watched this week, and I only had time to watch one, I watched Smile from 2022. This is a horror movie that garnered a lot of praise when it was out, a lot of critical praise, a lot of audience praise. So I had high hopes for this movie going in. I didn't love it as much as I maybe thought that I would. Not that I disliked it. There was a lot of good and a little bit of bad. That was sort of my take on it. So first of all, written and directed by Parker Finn, and at the time, this was his first full-length feature film. He had done short films prior to that and a whole bunch of advertising and I think some music videos and stuff like that. But this was his first feature film directing, and he wrote it as well. And it is shot really, really nicely. I really like the camera work, the composition of the shots in this. It evokes a little bit of Silence of the Lambs in quite a few areas because there are these tight close-ups on people's faces, the conversation going back and forth just between two tight close-ups, which does a great job of being like, well, what's going to show up behind that person? Or you're getting the reaction of the one person's face to camera, and you're like, well, what the heck are they looking at? And it builds up that tension and anticipation of it when the camera's finally going to turn around and show you. Does a really good job of that. But yeah, lots of fun, camera sort of rotating slowly to be upside down type of movements. Some really nice exterior shots I really liked. And I enjoyed that there were quite a few of the slow panning, but not just horizontally panning shots, vertically panning, diagonally panning. So it's a great test for if you've got any judder going on in your system.
Okay.
Because if you're not playing it back 24 frames per second from whatever source you're using, and then your display is showing it at an even multiple of 24, you are going to notice judder in this image if you're doing any conversion from 24 to 60. So on a technical sense, you can absolutely use it as a test case for that. But yes, the main character in this movie is played by actress Sosie Bacon, who I had only seen her name in Mayor of Easttown. In other things, she's been in other things, of course, but that's kind of the only other major show that I've seen her in any capacity. This movie rests entirely on her shoulders. This is almost her a solo act with some guest spots from other people in here. She does a terrific job. She is another actress that I want to give some credit to being like, I don't care if I don't look glamorous in this movie. Like, I'm going to be willing to be made, like makeup that is not flattering whatsoever and unflattering angles being shot by. And not every actor is willing to do that. Some of them only ever want to look pretty even when they're in dire situations. So I want to give her credit for that. Good acting on her part. But yeah, a lot of the I say guest co-stars, but I think of them almost like little guest star appearances because there's so little screen time for everybody else. Yeah, I mean, part of this is that this movie is about paranoia. It's almost like a personification of trauma, of in particular witnessed trauma. So no spoiler to say, like at the beginning of this movie, her main character as a child, 10 years old, witnesses the death of a parent, a drug overdose, and that traumatizes her, and she ends up with this savior complex, which is understandable, and it's following her character as an adult, where she has become a psychologist, and I feel like, in many ways, almost all of my criticisms of this movie are that they chose to make her a doctor. They chose to make her a psychologist. And if we are going to take that on a literal sense, she is the worst psychologist to have ever existed because she doesn't follow any of the rules. She, as soon as weird things start happening to her, she apparently forgets every bit of education and training she ever would have had as a psychologist. There is no rational reaction to anything, no frontal cortex thought going on whatsoever. It is pure emotional reaction. And it's not that that's what this personification of trauma does to everyone. Eventually, that's what everyone turns into, and that's understandable. But the idea that she just completely forgets everything she ever learned as a psychologist, apparently, is a lot of my criticism for this movie. That's not the actor's fault. That is in the writing. It's in the choice to make this a PhD psychologist that we're following. But yeah, I mean, like, her fiance is just the worst, played by Jesse T. Usher. Not that he's like he's not like violent or that type of thing. It's just completely unsupportive, which you start to question, okay, is that all in her head? Because a lot of this is the paranoia that's going on with this personification of trauma that's following her around. But it doesn't seem so. There are a couple of scenes where she's not in it, and he's still just that bad. So I feel bad for Jesse T. Usher as an actor. Would have seen him in The Boys. He plays A-Train in The Boys. So yeah, a lot of thankless roles. Her sister is just completely unforgivable. So it's just like it's pretty tough to go along.
It's a rare movie where any profession at all, and I noticed this in sci-fi,
is accurately portrayed.
It's always the sort of like simplistic image the non-profession, the rest of us in the world think of that profession, whether it's astronaut or psychologist or doctor or whatever. They always oversimplify and get wrong the profession in question.
So the amount that I've said and the way that I've said it, that is that's probably exaggerating the parts that I didn't like about this, because I don't want people to come away from my little review here thinking that I really did not like this movie, because I would say on balance, I liked slightly more of this movie than I disliked. But it's just that for me, it was a give and take. I absolutely did not love everything about this movie, and I wanted to. I wanted to love everything about this movie. But unfortunately, I couldn't quite do that. And I'm glad I didn't see it in theaters with a big audience, because it's me, and I laugh inappropriately at things that are definitely not supposed to be funny in horror movies. And I mean, there are many horror movies where you are meant to be laughing at stuff because they're kind of comedy horror, or they play things that way. This was meant to be very serious throughout. There are a couple of little moments that were meant to be comedic, but I was laughing at stuff that was clearly not meant to be comedic, and I would have felt bad because I would have been laughing out loud in the theater, and there would have been people going,
I probably would have been right there with you.
Yeah, it could have been.
Would have been right there with you. Laughing.
So, Smile, I would say it's worth a watch. I think on a technical level, it's worth a watch. Really shot really nicely. Like I say, a lot of the camera work I really liked. I think Sosie Bacon's performance is worth worth a watch on that, but I'm not able to say I absolutely loved it as much as I wanted to. There we go. Yeah, we've spent enough time introing this whole AVRant podcast episode, so why don't we go ahead and thank our listeners of the week? Those are people who have supported the podcast in some way, and like I said last week, I haven't set up a GoFundMe for Tom or anything like that. In fact, Herb, our good friend from Cross Spectrum Labs, is like, hey, maybe somebody in the AVRant listening audience has experience setting up a GoFundMe. It might have felt a little bit strange a week after Helene to do that. And, some people have already sent very generously money to the PayPal account that was already set up for AVRant. But since Milton is coming along, it wouldn't be that out of place. So putting the call out there, if someone wants to get in touch via question@avrant.com or rob@avrant.com to reach me directly. We don't want to set up multiple GoFundMes. Right, we want to have one place to send people, but would not be opposed to that to maybe help things out that way, because that way it's for sure marked as like donation, and you don't have to worry about income tax types things that might happen via PayPal. And as if Tom doesn't have enough headaches to worry about already, probably don't need to deal with any of that. So call is out there if somebody would like to help out in that way, but I'm not sure how easy that's going to be to organize. I don't have a ton of time to dedicate outside of the time I'm recording this podcast and writing the show notes before it, but we'll see what we can do on that front.
If anybody wants to help, we will find a way to allow you to help.
That's right.
So just get in contact.
But one thing we do know is that people have been donating via the PayPal account. If you come to avrant.com, on the desktop version over on the right-hand side, you will see a banner right there that says Support AVRant. There's an image of a cup of coffee there, and if you click on that, it'll take you to PayPal. You don't have to have a PayPal account to donate that way. You can just use a credit card and not sign up for a PayPal account if you don't want to have anything to do with that. But we have many people to thank this week. Some people have been very generous. Tom thanks you tremendously, and like I say, I will reiterate, anything that's coming into that PayPal account right now, none of it's coming to me. That's all going to Tom and his family. You don't have to worry that I'm like, where's my 10% cut? Nothing like that going on here. So Here are the names this week: Ilongo, Jeff, James, Graham, Raph, Daniel, Peter, Kevin, Charles, and Graham. A different Graham, completely different spelling. Fantastic to see that support. Tom is really, really, really thankful. It means a lot that people have been so generous and have been thinking about him. There might be other names that I'm just currently unaware of, because heaven knows a couple of names could have slipped through the cracks. It's not like Tom has a ton of time to dedicate to monitoring his emails and PayPal account right now. No, he does not. So if any names were missed, we are not leaving you out intentionally whatsoever. Huge, huge thank you to everybody who has been supporting Tom in that way. There is another way to support the podcast financially, and that's through Patreon. The web address is patreon.com/AVRantPodcast, and there you can sign up to make an automatic monthly donation if you'd like to do things that way. So we have 133 patrons right now. That's been holding pretty steady, and a couple of people let us know that they have been patrons for a long time, or in the case of Daniel, he just increased his pledge amount after what we said about Hurricane Helene. So thank you very much, Daniel, for doing that. Sherwin also let us know that he's been a Patreon supporter for quite a while. So big thank you to all of our patrons over there. Patreon.com/AVRant Podcast, and Sherwin and Daniel, thank you for being two of them. Now, if you don't want to just hand over money, there are other ways to support AVRant. Anything you think of, if you're supporting the podcast in any way, just let us know and we will mention you here. So Henry, he wrote in, he offered to send Tom his Panasonic UB450 Ultra HD Blu-ray player to help replace at least one piece of home theater gear that Tom lost. He lost his X700 Sony Ultra HD Blu-ray player in the flood. So that's very nice of you, Henry. Henry was like, where can I send it? And honestly, right now, if you could just hold on to it, Henry. Hang on to it.
Hang on a second. We've got another hurricane
that's right,
to get
because sending it to me in Canada wouldn't make any sense. So if you can hang on to that for a while longer, and we'll see once Tom and his family are a little bit settled, you might be able to send that to him there. So we'll get back in touch with you once we know what more is going on there. But thank you so much for that offer, because that's really generous and nice. And Jim also sent Tom another movie code that he can use whenever he actually has a way in which to watch it. So thank you, Jim.
Inevitably,
that is right. And other than that, there are folks who just send in their notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going because they are aware it's not necessarily the easiest thing right now, and they appreciate that we're keeping this podcast going in some way, shape, or form. So Sherwin, Jonathan, Stan, Henry, James, Elongo, a different Henry, Carl, Infinite Gary, Graham, David A, David B, which is fun because they came in right back to back, and I'm like, look at that. It's almost like we planned it. And Donald as well. Those are all the folks who let me know through emails. There have been other notes of support from YouTube and Facebook and things like that, and I just don't have the wherewithal to collect everything at the moment. So I am not excluding anybody. I'm not trying to leave anybody off the list, but I'm just focusing on the emails that I know I can keep organized. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in their questions. It means a lot to us right now in particular. So
I think everybody's going to understand if there was one little thing left out. There's
right, indeed. Yep. But I want to make sure, that we are very, very grateful and thankful, and it's certainly not leaving anybody out intentionally, ever.
Absolutely. Shall we move on to news?
Let's do just that. I'll let you talk for a bit.
Yeah, how about it? Via Sasi, just like us, Sasi has been on the lookout for any news about the new Sofabaton X2 Remote that was shown at Sofabaton's booth at CEDIA last month. And after coming up dry, he decided to just email Sofabaton directly.
Right.
Their director of international sales replied. It makes it sound like there's 5 people there, and he gets to director of international sales. It was very enthusiastic in saying they are looking to form relationships with dealers and retailers to become the de facto budget option for home theater installers and enthusiasts who used to look to Harmony remotes to solve their universal remote needs. I'm so glad we still have our little dinky Harmony thing. It doesn't even have a display on it. I love it so much. Nobody better sit on it and break it. I don't know what I'm going to do. Now, while Sasi couldn't give hard numbers, while the director of international sales couldn't give hard numbers for the launch date and price, he did say they are aiming to begin shipping the X2 in April 2025. And with the current X1S model priced at $190 MSRP, though frequently discounted and currently on sale at Amazon for $145 for Prime members, they are targeting under $300 for the X2's price. So that gives us a rough idea, at least, of when and how much for getting our hands on the new touchscreen hub-based remote.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that X2 because, that pretty much has all the features that I've been wishing that the X1 had. If you keep the price under $300, that's actually less expensive than the old Harmony Elites used to be. Yeah. So if it be pretty close to a 1-to-1 replacement, that's going to be very enticing. Now, I am remiss. Here's somebody whose name I forgot to mark down because I didn't think of it until we were just talking about it just now. I forgot to go back and mark it down. So I apologize. But yes, somebody let me know in some fashion. I can't remember if it was a YouTube comment or an email or what it was, but somebody let me know. They spotted on the poster the logo for Matter. The interoperability standard for Internet of Things home automation devices. There is the Matter logo on that X2's poster that they had at their CEDIA booth. So ostensibly, the X2 is going to be supporting Matter. We'll see to what extent that helps it with controlling home automation devices. But good eye, good spotting there. I'm not familiar enough with the Matter logo yet that I recognized it right away, but it's pretty prominent. It's right there, front and center on the poster that they had there. So yeah, good eye. And sorry, I forgot whose name. I'll put it in the show notes who it was. I'll look it up afterwards.
You can always say that later. A company called Fasetto, not falsetto. Right. Fasetto has just received certification from Dolby to transmit Dolby Digital and Dolby Atmos signals via their Audio Cu system. Now, does that Cu make a reference to copper, or is that just?
I would imagine it does. Yeah,
I never know how to say anything anymore.
I think they say it as Audio Cu because I think in their video that they were talking about it that they had it. But you're right because it is about transmitting things over existing copper wires. So it's all working for them, that Cu. It's all working. But I think they pronounce it Q.
Yes. Oh, Lord. So why is that interesting? Because the Fasetto Audio Cu system sends audio signals via your home's power lines.
Right.
You start with an Audio Cu transmitter that can attach via suction cups to the back of your TV. The transmitter has a single HDMI/HDMI eARC input, and you plug that transmitter into a wall outlet. Then each speaker gets its own Audio Cu receiver unit. Again, it has to plug into a wall outlet, and it can attach to the back of your speaker via suction cups. Then you just run regular red and black speaker wire connections from the receiver unit to your speaker's binding posts. The receiver unit has a 40-watt Class D amplifier, and if you want to connect it to a subwoofer, you'll need a subwoofer with speaker wire inputs. All of the setup is done via an app. Each speaker can be tuned for delay, level, and EQ. Looks like just a basic graphic EQ. The transmitter can be configured for anything from a 2.0 to a 9.1 speaker configuration and supports up to a 7.1.2 Atmos setup. You can have a maximum of 6 transmitters active in your home, a max of 10 speakers connected to any one transmitter, and a grand total of 32 speakers in your house. They claim they use AI to reduce any interference on your power lines.
Yeah,
the price and just everything is called is a program.
That's right.
It's just software.
You're not allowed to not say you have AI.
Right.
You got to have those investors on board.
Unless it's writing a term paper for me, don't call it AI. The price and launch date have not been officially announced yet, but they had an Indiegogo campaign that has now ended, which indicated that the retail price for a 5.1 Audio Cu system will be $800. That doesn't include any speakers, of course, just one transmitter and 6 receiver units, and then each additional receiver would be another $100. So $1,200 would get you the 7.1.2 Atmos transmission setup. So good luck to them. I've always felt like, and maybe this is just my instinct and it isn't true, that anything that tried to use the power lines does not do well.
So,
it's always been my impression.
Right. I think maybe the closest cousin to this is sending your network connection over your power lines, right? The Ethernet to power line adapters for sending your network traffic that way. And that has improved over time, right? They've gotten better at the error correction. They've gotten better at the interference rejection. And so it's pretty stable now if you use one of those power line converters for your wired home network. That works pretty decently. So certainly the concept behind this is something that it should be able to function in most situations. Whether or not that's going to pick up some erroneous noise from time to time. Like, I think if you start running your vacuum cleaner on the same circuit, it's going to be pretty hard to honestly filter out 100% of that. But at the same time, if you're running your vacuum cleaner, you've got auditory noise that's probably going to cover up whatever little bit of staticky comes in over your speakers at that point. But that sort of thing, when your air conditioner's compressor kicks on, if there's a little bit of a squelch in your audio, that wouldn't shock me to my core if you're transmitting all of those audio signals over your house's power wiring. But yeah, I kind of like this idea. I like that there's an alternative, right?
Yeah, I just think, my house is 1960 ungrounded power lines, and I don't know what would happen. I'd be curious to see how well it might work great. I don't know, but part of it's going to have to go back through an old fuse box.
Right.
So I don't know what's going to happen there.
But yeah, I like the idea that, you have multiple ways at coming at the issue of I can't easily and readily, or I just don't want to run normal speaker wire from a standard AV receiver or an amplifier to wherever my speakers are located in this room. But I've got a power outlet over there and that can work. Because even if you're doing the wireless transmission, that has to plug into a power outlet too. You have to have some kind of receiving and amplification device that is physically close to your speakers anyway. So yeah, the idea that you're doing away with the wireless part of it, which if it's Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or even a proprietary wireless signal, like that can be prone to interference as well. Tom has talked about many times, like sending a signal to his Bluetooth speakers. He turns his microwave on and it gets interference that gets
turned it on?
No. That if he turns his microwave on, he gets interference, that audible interference.
I thought you said the Bluetooth turned on his microwave.
No.
Holy cow.
That would be something. But no, just that it can be be picked up. So it's not that wireless solutions for your speakers are always free from interference either. So
Right.
yeah, the idea that, something had to be plugged in anyway, might as well send the audio signal over that very same power line. I like that idea. So I don't think the price is insane. It's not cheap as chips. It's not going to be that it's a no-brainer that this is what you're going to do. But if this solves the issue for you, at least they're not, up into the $6,000 entry level price like we were talking about all last week. So yeah, that's an improvement there.
Yeah, it can be an option for people. I can imagine if you're somewhere where there's a lot of crowded wireless space.
Yeah.
If you're in a big apartment building, possibly.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be better. Let's do some comments here, and then we'll finally move on to some questions. Now that we're this far into it, and I know Rob has a hard 2-hour limit.
Well, it's not a hard limit, but I can't go ages and ages afterwards like I sometimes do.
All right. Well, this is what we call in the AVRant business a tight 2.
There you go. Yeah.
just 2 hours.
We'll see.
So Josh says he heard Rob say that he was envious of the places where the Panasonic UB450 Ultra HD Blu-ray player model is sold, since we only have the UB420 and UB820 in North America. Well, Rob was mistaken.
I sure was.
What?
Rob
was mistaken. Oh my God. That might be the case in Canada, but in the USA, the UB450 is available. It's officially listed on Panasonic USA's website, and you can order it from Amazon for just $210. How about that?
I was very happy to be wrong in this case, and Josh, thank you so much for writing in to let me know about that, because yes, when I go to Panasonic.com, it takes me to the Canadian version. No mention of the 450 there. There's no 450 on Amazon or Best Buy or Walmart or anywhere else Canada. But yes, if I venture over to the USA version of the websites, I hadn't even thought to look in a while. That is fairly, about the beginning of the year is when the 450 showed up in USA. But yeah, that's great. So what I like here, in case people are wondering why I'm excited about this particular Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player model being available, we have the UB420. The 420 does HDR10, but it does not do Dolby Vision. But the 420 does have Panasonic's HDR optimizer, which sometimes people get confused about what the HDR optimizer is. It is not dynamic frame-by-frame tone mapping. Sometimes people think that's what the Panasonic players like the 420 offer. They do not. It is not dynamic frame-by-frame tone mapping. The easiest way to explain what the HDR optimizer is that it is pre-tone mapping. It is saying you can set a level manually in the Panasonic player to say, okay, if this HDR content on the disc is mastered to 2,000 nits or 4,000 nits or 10,000 nits, don't output that original signal. Instead, pre-tone map it to my choice of 1,000 nits or 750 nits or 500 nits, something lower than sort of the normal 1,000 nits. Is pre-tone map everything as it comes out of the player down to this lower nit level. But then your TV is still going to take that signal and potentially tone map it again. Right? If your TV has no problem getting to 1,000 nits or brighter, well, it's not going to do any additional tone mapping. Now, everything that came out of the Panasonic was limited to 1,000 or 750 or 500 to begin with. But if you have a LCD TV that's, not full array local dimming, but it does support HDR10 and the maximum brightness it gets to is 600 nits or something like that, well, then it's going to tone map it again, even though it was pre-tone mapped by the Panasonic. So it's been very helpful for a lot of projector owners. People who are running projectors that have just regular static tone mapping, no type of frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping like the JVCs or the LG projectors offer. And since they really can't handle 1,000 nits, being able to pre-tone map it down to, say, 500 nits or something like that helps out projectors quite often. So the UB420 had that, but it did not have Dolby Vision. The UB820, which is quite a bit more expensive, $500 or so, it has HDR10, it has the HDR optimizer, and it has Dolby Vision. So it had all the check boxes, and that was very nice. And it had the nicer build quality as well. So like Joe Klusnick said last week, hey, as long as you can buy once, cry once, go ahead and get the 820. You're probably not going to regret it because it checks all the boxes and has the nicer build quality. But I was like, I want there to be a less expensive Ultra HD Blu-ray player that supports Dolby Vision and does so correctly. Because you should not have to manually activate Dolby Vision and then manually deactivate it like the Sony players make you do, which is insane. And it if it does automatically activate and deactivate Dolby Vision, I want it to support 24 frames per second output as well, which the LG players don't do. So Panasonic is like the only one that's doing things correctly, and that's where the UB450 comes in. The UB450 does HDR10, it does Dolby Vision, it automatically switches Dolby Vision and frame rates the way it should. It just does not have the HDR optimizer. That's the thing that is removed from the 450, so it has the lower price. It has very similar build quality to the 420. So you kind of have this 420 and the 450. Do you want Dolby Vision or not? Do you want the HDR optimizer or not? You get one or the other between the 420 and the 450. You make your choice. But since there's so many displays that really have no problem with HDR tone mapping anymore and can easily show you 1,000 nits or 1,500 nits or 2,000 nits and really don't need that HDR optimizer anymore, or they have their own frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping built in and you really don't need that HDR optimizer, I want the one that can do Dolby Vision in a non-stupid way but for a lower price than the 820, and that's the 450.
Right. I'm still a little unclear on the utility of the pre-optimizing of that dynamic range, but I'm afraid if I ask, we'll run too long. So
no, I mean, it's just a matter of sometimes you put in a 2,000 nit signal to your television can only do 600 nits in reality, and the way that your TV tone maps throws out some of that highlight detail, right? It just fades off to white. And you're like, I would rather have a different method of tone mapping. Panasonic's HDR optimizer, their pre-tone mapping, it favors retaining as much highlight detail as possible. So you tell it, hey, don't output a signal any higher than 500 nits or 750 nits. That gets fed to your television, and now you get that highlight detail back.
So if your TV just happens to be bad about blown out whites, then that's a very good feature to have. Okay.
That's what it is.
Hey, what if we answer questions?
Let's try on this question and answer podcast.
Let's try it. Here's a question from last week from Manuel. Manuel comes to us with a bit of an unusual question. In his home theater setup, he's got a pair of SVS PB2000 subs, and he loves them.
Nice.
SVS subs, I do love them too. He's got a separate DJ controller that he uses for mixing music at home. How fun. He's been using that with his main PA speakers that he uses for DJing purposes, and he's been using a Gemini sub that's fed a signal via the Pioneer XDJ RR controllers left and right RCA outputs. It functions perfectly, but that Gemini sub isn't really giving him all the bass response that he wants. Yeah, if you're a DJ, you can never have enough.
That's right.
So he'd like to use his SVS PB2000 subs for his music mixing, but he still wants to use his DJing speakers and Pioneer controller, not his home theater speakers, just the subs. Yeah. The thing is, he needs to use the low-pass filter of the subs themselves, since the signal coming out of his Pioneer controller is just full range left and right.
Yeah.
And then he also wants to be able to adjust the volume of the subwoofers independently from everything else. He doesn't want to mess up his home theater calibration, so is there some external box that would let him do what he wants, give him a low-pass filter so he can feed his SVS subs from his Pioneer controller without having to apply a low-pass filter within his subwoofers all the time, and also give him a volume knob so he can easily adjust the volume of the subwoofers? And I see a mini DSP coming up as a recommendation.
I mean, that's what I know about. I was actually kind of hoping that, Lee, you might have some insight into this, because you've done a lot more two-channel mixing and stuff than I have, and I wasn't sure if you might have something to suggest on this front.
Well, my experience in two-channel mixing is in a radio environment and mixing live bands, and there was never an occasion where I needed, okay, I want to use these subwoofers on this system that's always sitting over here, and then I want to switch back to this when I'm not using it. I've never had a situation like that, so I just don't have a comparison. I mean, I would concoct some sort of switch, literal just switch box, I'm sure, because we did do a lot of funky old switch boxes back in the day when I was doing radio. At home, we used to have two Radio Shack switch boxes, and you should see the diagram I drew for myself to sort out how to send any source to any other source with these two switch boxes, and it was nutballs.
Matrixing is fun.
Back in the day, man, we did what we had to do to make it work. So I don't have a device I could tell you to use. I never ran across that situation.
Yeah, so my first thought was, depending on the capabilities of the AV receiver you're already using for your home theater setup, you might be able to accomplish what you want to do using your AV receiver. It's going to depend a little bit if the capabilities are there. Because here's what I totally get, right? So he's got PB2000 subs, not PB2000 Pros. Because if you had the PB2000 Pros, that would have helped you out because they can actually have presets, right? The PB2000 Pros, using that SVS app on your phone, you can store 4 different presets that you can just call up at the push of a button in the app. So that would have allowed you to have preset 1 is my home theater setup. Here's the volume for my PB2000 Pro subs in home theater mode, and they don't have their built-in low-pass filter activated. But then preset 2 is I can control the volume on the app, so I can control my subwoofer volumes that way. And then preset 2 does have a low-pass filter activated, so you could just use the left and right RCA inputs on your SVS subs if that's what you had. You know, the first input is coming from the subwoofer output of your AV receiver, and that's only get used when the AV receiver is on. And then the second output is used from the left and right full range outputs from your Pioneer DJ controller. And that all could have worked. So I don't know. There's a chance that he mistyped things in his email, and he actually does have PB2000 Pros rather than the original PB2000. So I want to mention that for the sake of completeness. It's possible you could do things just with the controls of the subwoofers themselves. But assuming that you really do have the original PB2000s and they didn't have the app and they didn't have the presets, what might be possible is if your AV receiver has the option for both speakers A and speakers B for your front speakers, well, then you could take the left and right full range pre-outs from your Pioneer DJ controller, put those into any RCA left and right inputs on your AV receiver, right? Like the CD input or the tape input on your AV receiver. And then when you want to use your DJ controller, you just say, well, turn off speakers A, my home theater front, left, and right speakers, and use speakers B. But speakers B aren't physically connected to anything. The front, left, and right main channel sounds is just going away. But that way your AV receiver can still apply its crossover for the subwoofer, so you don't have to change any settings in the subs themselves. The low-pass filter is being applied by the AV receiver, and it's just getting its full-range left and right signal from the DJ controller. So now the only thing actually playing sound that's connected to your AV receiver is the subwoofers, and that could work that way. But it depends on your AV receiver having the option for speakers A and speakers B. Many do, so I thought it was worth mentioning, because sometimes people, they don't even realize that that's an option in their AV receiver. So I think it's worth, checking your AV receiver's manual or just looking through the settings and be like, oh, hey, what do you know? There is speakers A and speakers B, so I can go to stereo mode, turn off speakers A, my home theater speakers, turn on speakers B. They aren't actually physically connected to anything, so that sound just goes away, and that could work. If none of that works and we're actually exactly what you asked for, some kind of external device, you can take the left and right pre-outs from your Pioneer DJ controller, plug them into a box. That box has a volume knob of its own, and then it's going to be able to apply a low-pass filter and send that low-pass filtered signal to your subwoofer so that you don't have to change anything in the settings of the subs themselves. That's where I know about the Mini DSP Flex. So this is a fairly simple 2-in, 4-out device. So I don't know exactly what your setup was. If you're actually using those same pre-outs from your DJ controller and you were like splitting them to also feed the amplifiers for your front, left, and right PA speakers that you use for DJing purposes, this could actually simplify it for you. It could actually give you a high-pass filter that's being fed to your front, left, and right speakers and give you a low-pass filtered signal to send to your subwoofers. It's got 4 outputs, 2 in, 4 out. So there's quite a bit you can do with the Flex in terms of how all the filters are applied inside of it. And then, like I say, it has its own volume knob right on the front there, so you can just control the volume right on the Mini DSP Flex itself. It also has a remote control, so if it'd be more convenient wire-wise to have this device a little bit away, you can use this little remote control that comes along with the Mini DSP Flex. So it has all the capabilities, exactly what you talked about that you need and are looking for. The only fly in the ointment of that's $495. It's not the cheapest box to ever exist. And that's what I warned about. The ointment. I warned about last week. I'm like, I'm betting you want something less expensive than that. But and look, I'm not saying this is the only solution. This is the one I happen to know about.
So I'm old school and cheap. Okay. What happens if you just feed a line level signal, full range, full frequency range, into this subwoofer? What happens?
It will try to play that full range signal up to its capabilities, which is about 250 hertz on the PB2000.
We would rather, right? Okay, so it would be better to feed it only. So yeah, then it gets more complicated because back in the day, I would have grabbed a switch box and a potentiometer, and off you go. Yeah, and it would have been $30.
Right.
So I'm not sure what to do when you need
the other potential option is that if it happens to work for your DJ setup, to have the low pass filter you would need to set in the subwoofers themselves, if that is actually quite high, like if it's 150 hertz, say, maybe even 120 hertz, then leaving that active in your subwoofers all the time, might not be the worst thing in the world. You know, you could maybe adjust the crossover frequency in your AV receiver for home theater purposes, because you will have cascading crossovers, right? You're going to have the crossover that the AV receiver applied, and then the crossover is active in your subwoofer as well. You're going to end up with cascading crossovers, but you might be able to adjust that so that it's perfectly fine for home theater purposes with the low-pass filter engaged in the subwoofers themselves, and then also works for the DJ setup. That might be some playing around you could do without having to buy anything.
Right. So if you can apply a low-pass filter to the output coming out of your DJ equipment, then you really could get by with my cheapo idea of just a switch box and a potentiometer, I think.
As a volume control that way, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been a Radio Shack thing I would have thrown together back in the day. So it's frustrating that you can't do something that simple. It might be possible, but there's an idea. I mean, at least you can solve it if you got 500 to throw at it.
Yeah, and I'm kind of hoping you discover the AV receiver you own has speakers A and speakers B, because that wouldn't cost you any money, and you wouldn't have to redo any wiring other than sending the left and right preouts from your DJ controller to your AV receiver, which is pretty simple, I think, in what you talked about. So I'm hoping you have speakers A and speakers B.
All right. Shall we move on to new questions?
I think we shall.
Now that we are halfway through the show.
That's right.
So new for this week, Mike. Mike has been looking to replace his living room TV for almost a year now. Boy, I bet he's ready to, his finger is floating over the button on, on like Amazon or Best Buy or something. But he's never gotten around to pulling the trigger. His wife is partial to Samsung's The Frame, but we are to blame for Mike really not wanting to go with that particular TV model.
It's a lot of money for not a very good TV.
That's right. Any suggestions on what they might get instead? There's just so many things one can do. I understand. A lot of people think they're going to hate a big TV in the room. I see that so often in people who aren't. So maybe his wife is not enthusiastic about the home theater, but she just likes watching stuff. But I've seen that so many times where I'm worried it's going to look ugly. It's got to blend in. It's got to blend in. It's got to look like a painting, blah, blah, blah. But I'm telling you, once it sits there and it's got a thin bezel and it's pretty flat and it's up against the wall, and especially if you just occasionally throw some art on it from some source.
Just, I mean, almost all TVs these days have the option of just showing still images.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a purposeful frame television. So I'm telling you, it's not
Samsung's The Frame is tremendously popular, unreasonably popular in my opinion. And many people really do like that super matte finish that it's got. No reflection whatsoever. Doesn't look like a big black mirror on your wall when it's off, or doesn't reflect the light when it's on and showing artwork. Just that really, really matte finish. A lot of people love that about Samsung's The Frame.
Well, so many people got it in their heads a long time ago that electronics are ugly.
Right.
They're just ugly, period. And we must do anything we can to avoid them, or our house will look ugly. But I'm telling you, it's not that way. When you're not in the room, you turn it off, you don't see it. When you are in the room, you can turn it on and show pretty pictures, even on a glossy screen, and it looks great.
That all said, Mike does have an actual home theater. So it's not as though he's without a system he can go to for top-notch image performance. This is the living room setup. And thankfully, since you waited a year, you have other options besides Samsung's The Frame that do very, very Samsung The Frame-like things, but at a lower price point. And I say, rather than fighting your wife's desires for Samsung The Frame, the very few times do you say, here's something that's actually slightly better than Samsung's The Frame, does all the things you love about Samsung's The Frame, and costs less. That's very often a winning argument. So what we can point you to, Hisense brought out their Canvas TVs.
Oh, Canvas.
It's exactly like Samsung's The Frame. It is a completely matte finish on the screen surface. It has interchangeable magnetically attaching frames that you can it comes with a sort of light wood design, but you can optionally buy other ones, white, black, or darker wood finishes. They magnetically snap onto it. And so you can have whatever frame-like appearance that you want from Hisense's Canvas TVs. Very, very thin, comes with a flush wall mount. It is edge-lit, LED backlit LCD, just like Samsung's The Frame is, but it's actually measured as having better performance than the Frame. It's got higher native contrast, it's brighter, it does all the gaming features, and in fact, it goes up to VRR with 144 hertz if you want gaming feature support. So the good news here is, instead of $1,600 for the 65-inch Samsung The Frame, it's $1,100 for Hisense's 65-inch Canvas TV. Like I say, pretty winning argument, I think, overall.
Very good argument, yes.
Got some photos from people who actually install it in the house. I'm like, man, that really does look like just a normal piece of artwork that's going on there. I can see why someone might really, really like it. You might not even know that it's a television. So I think it's honestly fairly impressive. The only possible fly in the ointment, Hisense in their Canvas TV lineup only has two screen sizes, 55-inch or 65-inch. Not a gigantic shock. Those are by far the most popular screen sizes, and if that works, the price is lower than the Frame. But if you were wanting a 75-inch or a smaller, a 50-inch or something like that, they just don't have that in Hisense's Canvas TV lineup this year. I have every suspicion they're going to find a lot of success with that series and probably expand the available TV sizes next year. But for now, it's 55-inch or 65-inch. So is there something else that could give you the larger or smaller screen sizes, do the same thing, but at a lower price? Well, yeah, TCL was like, hey, what about us? We have something called the Next Frame TV from TCL. Yeah, they like to copy each other's names here, don't they?
Of course they do. It's all the same purpose. So that makes sense.
Exactly the same idea. Completely anti-glare matte screen surface. Now, this one, as far as I know, they haven't mentioned like interchangeable frame options on TCL's Next Frame. So it's only this kind of light wood finish going around it. Very thin frame. But yeah, that's as far as I know, the only option there as far as the frame part of it itself. Now, the thing was, when TCL announced their Next Frame series, they had the exact same price points as Samsung's The Frame. Similar to Hisense, they've actually measured as having better native contrast, brighter, all the gaming support, HDMI 2.1 features, but they are still edge-lit LCD TVs. You're not getting full array local dimming or anything like that. But they have since discounted every model across the Next Frame lineup by $1,000.
That's significant.
Isn't it, though? So the 65-inch TCL Next Frame is going for $1,000 now, which is $100 less than Hisense's. And then they also have 75-inch, 85-inch, 55-inch, 50-inch available. So they have all the screen sizes that Samsung's The Frame offers. Like I say, originally their price points, their MSRP was identical to Samsung's The Frame MSRP, but they have since discounted all of them by $1,000 to undercut even Hisense's Canvas TVs. So that would definitely be an option, TCL's Next Frame TVs.
There we go. Yeah. Whichever TV they end up buying for the living room, it will end up being mounted above the fireplace.
I know.
Meanwhile, the rest of his home theater equipment and the AV receiver that handles source switching and the living room's speakers live in the basement on the opposite side of the house.
Yeah.
He's been using an HDBaseT converter to carry the HDMI signal via Ethernet, but at this point, it's an older discontinued model, and it doesn't have all of the features he's hoping for. Behind the fireplace TV, he's got Ethernet, power, and coax. If running a fiber optic HDMI cable is literally the only way to do what he wants, he's willing to go that far, but he'd really rather avoid it if possible.
Sure.
Obviously. I mean, I guess you have a pull. You could use one of the other cables you're not using.
I don't know if it was conduit back there, though. So that could be pretty hinky.
His current HDBaseT converter will supposedly carry 4K signals, but it's only officially spec'd as supporting HDMI 1.3B, and it doesn't carry HDMI ARC or CEC signals, which he would like to have for his new TV. He could get by with Wi-Fi, but he prefers a wired network connection whenever possible. I understand, but boy, Wi-Fi is pretty good nowadays.
Right.
So if the new HDMI to Ethernet converter could carry Ethernet signals over the same single cable, that would be nice to have. And for the time being, he's still using a Harmony remote for some devices, and the distance is too great to just rely on its RF signal to the Harmony hub. So he'd like the HDMI to Ethernet converter to also have bidirectional IR if possible. Can we suggest any current HDBaseT converters that can do all of that? There's always a way if you can throw $1 or $2 at it.
Yeah. And these aren't the ones I'm going to suggest. They're not insane price-wise.
No, well, a little
they're
bit.
Not like under $100, but they're not like thousands and thousands at all. Well, one of them is over $1,000. We'll get to that. But yeah, I'm going to point you to O-Ray, which hasn't always had the absolute best track record reliability for their HDMI switches and stuff like that, but their stuff built on the HDBaseT standard is pretty reliable. There haven't been too many reports of issues with their HDBaseT converters in particular. So the first one I'm pointing you to goes for $260. You know, it's not cheap as chips, but you wanted quite a few features. So you got to take that into consideration. The model numbers are insane, so I think I'll just be easier to refer you to the links. But yeah, I'll say it in case you want to search for it. It's the UHD-EXB132AR. I have no idea what any of that refers to, but anyway, that's what it is.
Can't they just come up, just name it after a flower or an animal or something? Use a word.
But
what's wrong with companies?
This $260 one, I mean, they prominently say that it supports HDMI ARC. Now, this is HDMI 2.0, not 2.1. We'll get to that in a minute, but 2.0, 18 gigabits per second. So that'll get you 4K 60, full 444, no compression on that. It just won't do 4K 120. It won't do 8K. But 4K 60, 444, all the HDR formats, including Dolby Vision, with HDMI CEC supported, with HDMI ARC and eARC supported, with infrared in and out on both ends. And since it is the HDBaseT standard, you actually only need a power connection on one end of this converter system. It will send power over the Ethernet cable to the other device, so plug in either the transmitter or the receiver unit. You don't have to plug in both, which is kind of nice. They do strongly suggest, if you're doing the 18 gigabits per second, that you use at a minimum a shielded Cat6 cable. And I don't know what's in your walls. I'm betting it's Cat5e, which should function. It should function, but if there are any little glitches, you might end up in the situation where it's time to replace the Ethernet cable that's in your walls, because they're like, Cat6A would be better. Cat7 is a bit overkill. But yeah, shielded Cat6 is kind of the minimum they recommend if you're doing the full 18 gigabits per second. But you maybe not doing the full 18 gigabits per second. I mean, that's completely uncompressed. If you are willing to do some chroma subsampling down to 420 or something like that, you're going to fit in the 10.2 that Cat5e can carry quite comfortably. So the only thing missing from this particular model from O-Ray is the Ethernet being also carried over the same thing. Now, you said that wasn't make or break, that you could go back to Wi-Fi. So if the money is more important than that feature of also having Ethernet going over that very same cable, then this will do it for $260. If you're like, no, I must also have that Ethernet connection, we can point you to a different, more expensive O-Ray model. Stupid model numbers, the UHD-EXB330AUR. Why not? I have no idea
make
why.
It longer.
But this is $390. So pretty good step up in price there. And honestly, in your situation, the only thing it's really adding is that Ethernet connection, because it's still HDMI 2.0, it's still 18 gigabits per second, still Dolby Vision, pass-through, the HDMI CEC support, HDMI ARC and eARC support. So one of the reasons this is more expensive is that this is also a USB KVM keyboard and mouse that you can send signals over as well. So that's not really what you're doing here. This is meant for more of a 4K HDR computer setup to be able to use that as well. That's part of what's being built into the price there, but that's not really what you're using. But it does have the Ethernet connection also built in on both sides. So that gives you every single feature you asked for $390. Now, If you're like, no, I got to have HDMI 2.1. Well, now the price is going to skyrocket because O-Ray does have an HDMI 2.1 solution, 40 gigabits per second. You need a Cat 6A or a Cat 7 cable, and I'm betting that's not what's in your wall right now.
It's not.
Too many people would have had that. But every feature you could possibly want, HDMI 2.1, 4K 120 support, 8K 60 support, it's $800 dues now to get that solution. But at least it exists, and it has a model number of BK-EXB330EUA, in case you want to Google it for some odd reason instead of clicking the link. But yes, that's on the latest HDBaseT 3.0 standard, and it does all the features you could possibly hope for in an HDMI converted to Ethernet type of setup. If you want to look through the plethora of sometimes available, sometimes not rotating roster of Blackbird converters that Monoprice sells, I'll have the link to their HDBaseT section. But I have a heck of a time telling which ones support CEC and ARC and that type of thing, and it's constantly rotating what's actually available in that Blackbird lineup. So O-Ray's was more organized, even though their model numbers are stupid, but that's fine. You don't have to pay attention to the model number, and the prices are very comparable between Monoprice and O-Ray anyway, so there's not really a bunch of savings. They have an HDBaseT 3.0 HDMI 2.1 solution at Monoprice, and it's $500 per unit. So it's $1,000 in total. So the O-Ray is actually less expensive at $800 if you want HDMI 2.1 support.
That gets crazy on those higher ends. I do wish companies would stop naming their models by drawing Scrabble tiles out of a bag. Just use words, please.
But $260 plus Wi-Fi and supporting 4K 60 and then all of the features you wanted. I'm like, that to me sounds like kind of doable, right? That's not so insane that you're taking out a second mortgage type of stuff.
I feel like I wouldn't mind throwing $130 more at it though to get the one that
to do everything you wanted.
To do everything. Yeah, I think that would be fair. But stop there. Don't go to $800.
Probably not.
that's too much. Reminds me, I need to run some new cables because I want to do 2.5 gig per second Ethernet here in my house.
Yeah, Cat 5e ain't going to do that for you.
No, we got to move on up, and I'll just go crazy and get me a Cat 7 or 8 or something, or whatever it is. And
Cat 7's a little unwieldy to work with. 6A, man. Stop at 6A. I think you'll be all right.
I don't know. I just, why not? I only need one. I need one long run of it, probably 75 feet, and then I need about 25 or 30 feet, then I need about 10 feet. So I only need 3 cables. So why not, go for the gusto? Because the last wires we put in have more or less lasted for 20 years.
Right, yeah.
So it's going to be there a while. May as well. Anyway, Jonathan has a question. First up, since he was in a time crunch, Rob emailed back and forth a couple of times with Jonathan ahead of this week's podcast. So Jonathan has already made a purchasing decision, but this is a review for you, the dear listener and viewer. But thinking through his situation and discussing the trade-offs might be helpful to other listeners, so let's discuss what Jonathan asked about earlier this week. When the JVC NP5 projector model went on clearance for $4,000, down from its $6,000 MSRP, he felt like he couldn't pass it up. It is a pretty good deal. He went ahead and bought one and installed it as physically close as possible to his 165-inch 16:9 screen in order to get as much light out of its lens as possible. His screen is acoustically transparent, and Jonathan noted that according to Pixel HT and their independent screen gain measurements, it has a gain of 0.8, even though the manufacturer claimed it has a 1.0 gain. He didn't say it explicitly, but that would seem to line up with it being an Elite Screen's Acoustic Pro UHD material or something very similar to that. Anyway.
Yeah, and I will just note, if you, I'll have the link to that Pixel HT one where they measured a bunch of different popular acoustically transparent screens. By and large, and like according to like Chris Seymour over at Seymour AV, it seems like whatever method they used for taking their measurements, it seems consistent, but they seem to measure basically 0.1 gain lower than like everybody else. But it was consistent across the board. So there's a pretty good argument that if you say your screen is actually about 0.9, like if you're plugging it into Projector Central's calculator is what I'm talking about, that, yeah, like 0.8 is going to be a little bit probably on the conservative side. 1.0 is probably a little optimistic. It probably isn't actually. If it didn't have the holes in it for the sound to get through, it would probably be 1.0, but it does have the holes for the sound to get through. So yeah, but it seems like pixel HTs were across the board about 0.1 gain lower than most other places that do similar measurements. So you can kind of fudge that up, maybe 0.1 for across the board, everything you see there.
Sure.
Yeah.
We've mentioned on this podcast how the light output from the JVC NP5 is just about perfect for a 120-inch screen size or smaller. But if you want proper HDR performance, meaning about 100 nits or 30-foot Lamberts reflected off the screen, then the NP5 can't really handle much larger than that. And, well, it seems we were correct. To be clear, the NP5 looks great. He really likes what it does for HDR with its frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. But at his screen size, with his screen's gain, HDR highlights are really no brighter than SDR images. There just isn't any headroom to spare.
Yeah.
So, with the return window on his NP5 closing, he emailed Rob and they discussed his options. After returning his NP5, he could go as high as $10,000 for a new projector and screen. So he put together his list of options. Wait for the new JVC NZ700 and pay $9,000. Not enough left over for a new higher gain acoustically transparent screen. Or get a used JVC NZ7 for around $6,000 and also get a new higher gain screen to hopefully combine for something close to 100 nit performance. Or get a used NZ8 for the best price he can find, maybe or maybe not get a new screen too, depending on what a used NZ8 ends up costing. Or go with a different brand of projector altogether, like perhaps the new Epson QB1000 for $8,000 that is spec'd to provide substantially higher light output. Wow, that's a lot of really difficult options, I think.
I know, yeah. That's why I needed to a little help thinking through it, but all very logical.
No, all that, those are all logical, but that's why I say difficult, because it takes a second to make a choice out of that. HDR highlight brightness was the main thing Jonathan was looking to improve. But at the same time, he couldn't help but notice that the MP5's black levels weren't as black as the border of the screen.
Yeah.
So he was kind of hoping to get an improvement on that end of things as well. He knows a projector will never match an OLED, but he definitely wouldn't want the black levels and contrast to be any worse than the MP5, and he'd appreciate if they could be better.
Yeah.
So he was also curious as to whether running MadVR software on his computer might allow a less expensive, higher brightness projector to compete with the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping built into the JVC projectors. So what were all of the trade-offs? What did Jonathan ultimately decide to do, and how might other listeners work through a similar decision with Rob?
So yeah, I included all of that information because it really
that's interesting.
The only way I can work through a problem like this is process of elimination, right? You've got all of these options where it's like, well, yeah, just about any of them might be able to get you to where you want, maybe within your budget. So how do we start winnowing it down and being well, here's what makes the most sense. So first thing I wanted to focus on, right. So if you were talking about getting an outboard pre-built MadVR NV processor, like they just announced their NV Core, which, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the price. I think the introductory price on it was $4,000 or $5,000. So you're talking basically spending like half the budget just on the processor if you do that, leaving you a lot less for the projector. But all along, MadVR has had their software that you can put on your own PC that you build yourself, and you can still get like the beta version through GitHub and places like that for free. It's still out there, so you can still get that software and run it yourself. Now, one thing there is that, of course, will only ever apply to your PC being used as the source. So if you have any other source devices, your best case scenario is getting some kind of HDMI capture device that would remove the HDCP copy protection and then allow you to apply the MadVR software to it and then output it from your computer.
Oh, God.
Yeah, we're getting kind of nuts to do that. Or you're just home theater PC is my only source. And that didn't seem to be the case here. When chatting a little bit with Jonathan, he's got other sources he wanted to use. So it's like, okay, so you're basically saying you're only going to have one source, and that's not really it. So the MadVR software solution on a PC all by itself wasn't quite going to meet his needs. But further to that, it's not magic. It can't make the black levels and the native contrast of a projector any better.
Exactly.
It can tone map. It can do all kinds of dynamic contrast things. It can do, lots of tuning to the image, but the blackest black that the projector can produce can't do anything about that. The difference between maximum black and maximum white shown at the same time on screen, MadVR can't do anything about that. So to me, the idea of when you wanted your black levels and contrast to be even better than a JVC NP5, going to an Epson projector, even though it's brighter, is not going to be the solution, because you're going to be taking a step backwards in black levels and native panel contrast, and a MadVR isn't going to be able to help you on that front. It's not going to make the black levels any deeper. So I eliminated that as the option. Now, initially, I actually suggested the NZ700, the brand new model, to him, because even though it's not tremendously brighter on paper, the difference in going from the lamp-based NP5 to the laser-based NZ700, by actual measurements of real-world performance, there's a considerable greater amount of calibrated light that makes it onto the screen from the NZ700 versus the NP5. Because with the lamp, you're doing quite a bit of tuning to actually have accurate color on there, right, and you're losing light output every time you make an adjustment. Whereas with the laser beginning there's not as much that has to be adjusted there. But the native contrast between the two of them is not tremendously different. Like, they're claiming 80,000 to 1 in the NZ700 versus 40,000 to 1 in the NP500, but that's like a fraction of a nit on the very bottom end. Oh. It's not really tremendously noticeable. And then you're actually giving up some features, because the NZ700, it doesn't do 4K 120. It's 4K 60 only. It doesn't do 3D even as an option anymore. The lenses are different and don't have as much zoom range and don't have as much lens shift range and stuff like that. So there's actually some give and take if you're doing that, and it would max out his budget.
What's frustrating is when you hear laser projector, you would think, it feels like a laser ought to be able to be off and make perfect black.
Well, it can if it's a full black screen, but as soon as there is anything on the screen, it doesn't have full array local dimming. You're illuminating the entire panel with that laser as soon as there's anything on screen. So yes, the full fade to black would absolutely be better on the NZ700. It'll be better on the NZ7. It'll be better on the NZ8 versus the NP5. But as soon as there's anything on screen, ANSI contrast, black and white on there at the same time, well, then you're just down to the native panel level. So a used NZ7, what would that get you? Well, it used the exact same panel, has the exact same contrast rating, and is rated at, I think, 100 lumens brighter than the NP5. It's basically just the laser version of the NP5 was the NZ7. That's more or less what was going on there. It technically had 8K E-shift, but where it was only wobbling the panel twice per frame, so it was half of 8K resolution. And how often are you actually going to use that? I'm not really worried about it.
Never.
So all of that was like, okay, in that case, he'd want to get the higher gain screen along with it. But if you're looking for acoustically transparent 165 inches that's actually going to give you greater than 1.0 gain, if you're reading through Pixel HT's thing, they're like, yep, hot spotting, yep, sparkle, like that. You just start noticing those things. I'm like, I'm not willing to do that. I that bothers me a lot more.
Yeah.
So thankfully, and this is going to be the end of the story here, he found a used NZ8, because there are people who are doing the upgrades to the new NZ800 and NZ900, and that NZ8 he found for actually, a couple $1,000s under his $10,000 budget. That thing is 500 lumens brighter, which is not insignificant. That's quite a bit brighter. Double the native panel contrast of the NP5 or the NZ7, which, like I say, is like a fraction of a nit at the very lowest end, but it's something. It's not worse than the NP5. It's better black levels, better contrast, clearly brighter. At a price you can afford, has all the features, not giving up anything. And I'm like, okay, if you can afford to get that and you can return your NP5, that's what I would do. I would go get that NZ8, and that is what he did. He went ahead and purchased that used NZ8. Now, he had a concern before he got there, because he saw some people on AVS Forum who were like, we fully calibrated an NZ7 and we fully calibrated an NZ8, and even though it claims to be 500 nits brighter, in the end, it wasn't. They were pretty similar. I'm like, but they fully calibrated them. And the NZ8 has one other feature that the NZ7 and the NP5 and the the NZ7 and the NP5 don't have. The NZ700 actually has added this, and it come to parity with the NZ8 on this one feature, which is an optional DCI P3 color filter to get you the full wide DCI P3 color. if you put that in place, and if you fully calibrated an NZ7 versus an NZ8, you would have put the P3 filter in place to get the most accurate P3 color. You put that P3 filter in place and it cuts the light output by about 25%. Very significant. But you don't have to put the P3 color filter in place. And you take it out and there's your extra 500 lumens that have come back. That's what's going on there. So if what you want is the greater brightness for those HDR highlights, it's tied to the picture mode that you use. So just don't use one of the picture modes that puts the P3 filter in place. If, however, you're watching, there's plenty of movies that is like technically they're HDR, but the brightest they ever get is like 200 nits in the signal. You know, they really aren't going to 1,000 or 1,500 nits or anything like that. Now you have the option to be like, oh, I have enough light output to show that, and I can put the P3 color filter in place and get the wider color. You have the option to do either of those things. So all of that made sense. He ended up getting the used NZ8, but that's my process of elimination, sort of working through all the available options and landing on that as the answer.
Nah, man, I love it. I love the process of elimination and finding the thing that does get incrementally better in a way that he'll actually see.
Oh, yeah.
And
he'll see the difference from an MP5 to an NZ8. I have no doubt of that.
He's going to feel so good about that. I would like to hear from him how the purchase goes. I'm always so worried about buying something used. It's like, don't ship it to me. I'll just come get it.
Right.
I always worry so much about things being shipped that are used, but good luck to him on that one. I have a feeling that's going to be the perfect choice.
I hope so.
Let's move on to, is it Stefan or Stefan?
That's what we've been saying. We've been saying Stefan.
Stefan wrote in a few weeks ago after upgrading his old 50-inch plasma to a new 83-inch LG G4 OLED. Nice big step up. Tom joked that it must have been like going from a porthole to a full-size window. So Stefan sent in a picture of his original setup with a 32-inch CRT. What was that then? A keyhole? But like, seriously, I used to compare. This is so funny that Tom used the term porthole, because when I used to try to explain to people what it was like seeing an HD image,
right?
This is back in the 2000s, early 2000s. I would tell them that when you're watching your standard glass tube CRT, when you go watch high def, it's not that you're so much like overwhelmed with the amazing magical quality. It's that when you come back to your house and you watch your TV, you think you're looking through an ugly porthole.
Right.
Like you get used to HD so fast back then, and I did, and you get spoiled so fast that a regular TV just looks hilarious when you go back and look at it. And sure enough, the picture he has sent, just from our modern eyes, looks hilarious back then. But that was so good back in the day.
That was a big TV, 32-inch CRT at the time.
Yeah. So it was a keyhole. He's got his home theater equipment in a rack that's just outside of his 13 by 24 foot room. But when he tried sending a signal from his Roku Ultra through his Arkham receiver to his new OLED, it looked way too dark. So he decided to try the TV's built-in apps. That meant it was necessary to turn on HDMI CEC so that the HDMI audio return channel would function. Yep, that's how it does. And after he did that, nothing was working reliably. Really? HDMI CEC? You're kidding me. So we told him to turn HDMI CEC off in every single device since he uses a URC universal remote anyway, and we suggested setting the Roku Ultra to output 420 in its chroma settings to hopefully improve the way too dark image he originally got. Our suggestions worked.
Woohoo!
Yes. So he wanted to start by saying thanks for all of that. And now he has additional questions. Now that he knows we can solve problems, here comes some more. So it's great to hear that did the trick.
Yes, I'm very happy about that.
Very. So he added a new 4K cable TV box since he might as well enjoy the best service possible from his TV provider on his lovely new OLED. But when he first connected the new cable box, all he got was a black screen. Oh, I don't miss cable.
Yeah.
I don't miss their equipment. His Arkham receiver does top out at HDMI 2.0, not HDMI 2.1, but that shouldn't be any problem for a cable box outputting 4K 60 at the most, right?
Indeed. Yeah, that's HDMI 2.0. Shouldn't be a problem in that sense.
Should be fine. Regardless, he temporarily connected the new cable box to his old 1080p TV and then locked its output to 1080p instead of 4K. After doing that, he could see an image in his home theater, and then he could try the other output settings with it automatically reverting after 30 seconds if he couldn't see anything on the screen. That's smart.
Yep.
Get it to a mode where you can see it and then experiment. 1080p worked fine. And so did 4K if it was limited to 24 frames per second. But 4K's 60 output always resulted in nothing but a black screen. So his HDMI cables are pretty old. HDMI 1.3 if he's remembering correctly. Strangely, the Roku Ultra outputting 4K 60 seems to work fine.
Right.
But it's probably time for some HDMI cable upgrades, right? Thankfully, he ran conduit. So you can use one as a pull.
That's right.
In his email, he says the HDMI cables from his sources to his AV receiver are 3 meters, and from his AV receiver to his TV is 10 meters. We wonder if he meant 3 feet and 10 feet, looking at the diagram of his room that he sent, but we can respond either way. We can do it in both systems.
Yeah, because he's in Belgium, so he's used to putting meters, but I'm looking at him like, how is that 30 feet away? I don't know what circuitous route it could have taken from the equipment rack that's quite literally just around the corner from the TV.
So maybe he was trying to get it to where we could talk in feet. You don't have to do that, guys.
That's right.
We can talk in meters. Even me here in Alabama, I know what a meter is.
Everything is in his equipment rack, but they're 10 feet apart. It seems unlikely. 3 feet in his rack, and then 10 feet to the TV that's just around the corner. All seems more likely to me, but regardless, we'll answer both ways.
Right. So recall I just told you that it's 22 degrees outside.
That's right.
And it's beautiful short sleeve weather. So we can handle it. Anyway, so he's in Belgium. So he typically orders new cables from either Amazon or is this BOL or
BOL? Yeah, I'm not sure how it's pronounced.
Bowl?
Yeah,
maybe
BOL.
it's Bowl.
Could be.
What would we recommend to him for his HDMI cables upgrade?
Yeah, so I do think it's reasonable. The price is not going to be excessive.
No.
And the one I'm going to point you, because they're available, definitely I looked it up at Amazon Belgium, is RUI Pro, RUI Pro. They have both slim HDMI cables that I like a lot. I like getting a slim HDMI cable whenever I can. So if you're talking it's 3 feet between the source and your AV receiver, if it was 1 meter, not 3 meters inside of your equipment rack, well, then I'm going to suggest using their RUI Pro Slim regular copper cables, because those are great up to 10 feet maximum. So even if it is 3 meters, that could work perfectly fine. Now, if it was 10 feet from the equipment rack to the TV, then use one of those 10-foot long slim cables, because that's going to be just fine. If it actually was 10 meters, 33 feet, then you're going to want to go to a fiber optic, and you're going to want it to be in-wall rated. And RUI Pro has those too. Okay. So if you just go to Amazon Belgium and search for RUI Pro HDMI, they're going to have every option you could conceivably need at good prices. And what I like about them is they are fully HDMI certified. They have the hologram, they have the QR code, and they were actually the first company to get in-wall rated fiber optic HDMI 2.1 cables fully certified. So they've been at it for a while. They're solid, they work, they're reasonably priced, and they're available from Amazon Belgium.
And I assume nice and supple so they pull through a conduit.
That's what I like about them.
Yes. Yeah. So for his next big home theater upgrade, he wants new subwoofers. He's been using a stereo sub NHT system for a long time now, and he wants to change things dramatically by upgrading to a pair of SVS SB3000 subwoofers instead. That would be a very dramatic change, wouldn't it?
You will notice that.
And believe me, I know about a long time with some speakers. I've been talking to Rob about starting to get ideas about new speakers to replace my year 2000 Yamaha speakers.
There you go.
So doing so will also let him change the placement of the subwoofers in his room. Both NHT cabinets are on the front wall right now. With the pair of SVS subs, he intends to go with diagonally opposite corner placement. Okay.
Nice. Yeah.
Wiring from his equipment rack to the front of the room is fairly easy since he installed wide diameter smooth conduit. Again, I love a good supple conduit. But from the TV's position to the rear corner where he'd like to put his second SB3000 sub, he does have a conduit, but it's only 3/4 inch and it has some bends in it, so he doesn't think pulling a regular RCA subwoofer cable is going to be all that easy. 3/4 inch, if there's nothing much else in it.
Yeah, that's right.
He's perfectly fine doing some soldering if necessary. But what would we recommend for the longer subwoofer cable run to the rear corner of his room? First of all, respect to wanting to do some soldering. I have a soldering iron, and I find it to be kind of fun. I feel special and smart when I solder anything. I did that with a car stereo several years ago. Felt really good.
It's kind of rare that you end up needing to solder a coax cable, though. Because pretty much anything you terminate at home is all done with a crimp.
You're going to get a coupler for that.
Yeah, it's just a crimping system. So you can order all of that off of Amazon. You could order just bulk coax wire, which is all you need. All you need is bulk coax wire, the same stuff you would use for a cable connection. And actually, one of my thoughts was, I'll bet your cable company could send a guy who could pull just a bulk coax wire through that. He might not have an RCA connection. He might only have a F terminal, the type that screws on. But you could get just a compression RCA plug, have it ready for him. He could use his tools, because the tools aren't expensive, but if you're literally going to do this twice, once on either end of the cable, then it's kind of like, why would I buy the crimping tool when I could just call my cable company and they can bring theirs and they could do it? So I think that's worth investigating. But yeah, if all the supplies you need, you can go to Amazon Belgium, you could just get bulk coax cable, you can get compression fit RCA jacks, and you could absolutely do this yourself. You could also do a wireless subwoofer kit. Just look up any wireless subwoofer kit, also available on Amazon, and that could be a solution for doing it without pulling the wire through the wall.
Yeah, but pulling that wire and doing it yourself, man, that's going to feel so good.
Yeah, just look for compression fit, RCA cable, any coax cable. That's all you need. It's a very simple process.
And take pictures and update us, because I want to see how that goes for you. I like little projects like that. Adriano has a question. Adriano listened with interest when Rob made some suggestions for absorption panels that can be purchased in Australia. He found an option that Rob didn't mention from Selby. They mostly list foam treatments, but they also have some rigid fiberglass panels available, including packs of 4 that help to lower the price point. Their 2-foot by 4-foot panels are less expensive than the ones Rob mentioned from acoustictreatments.com.au, but they are only 1 inch or 2 inches thick. However, they use a denser insulation material, so Adriana was wondering if they might be a viable option. $115 each for the 2 by 4 foot by 2 inch thick Selby panels versus $150 each for the acoustictreatments.com.au panels. Or a 4-pack of the Selby panels for $370, $92.50 per panel. Thinner but denser, would that make them perform any differently? What if they were mounted with an air gap, although the included mounting hardware doesn't leave any air gap, so that would also need to be factored into the price.
Yeah.
I don't know does the density help that much?
Well, I mean, it's kind of an inverse thing, because the actually less dense, kind of fluffier insulation is measurably a tiny bit better at full broadband absorption. The denser material starts to reflect a little bit of the higher frequencies a little bit. Lower in frequency, it'll start acting a little bit more like a reflector than an absorber. It's a tiny difference. It's not really, it's certainly not where, now that I have a denser material, I can only use 2 inches instead of 4 inches. It doesn't make anything close to that kind of a difference in the performance. Personally, given the gap in price, I would much rather have the 3.5 inch thick ones from acoustictreatments.com.au. Because otherwise you're basically having to double up these panels, and now they're more expensive if you doubled them up in thickness. Plus you're changing the mounting method and everything like that as well. So I don't mind that there's a 2-inch option that's out there that costs less than the ones that I pointed to. That's good. That's good to have, that there is a 2-inch option out there if you just need to get that price as low as you possibly can while still being insulation based. But that would be for when you're specifically trying to treat the vocal region only. You're not trying to reach down into the lower mid-range or the crossover region at all. Sometimes that's what you want to do. Sometimes you're really just trying to treat a vocal reflection, a strong first reflection only in the vocal range. So I like that you pointed out the 2-inch option, but for the overall, just trying to get about 10% of this room covered to knock down overall reverberant decay times, I want the thicker panels, and the density really doesn't play into it.
Right. I can tell you from experience, cheap quilts do just as well.
I suppose. It doesn't look quite as nice. This was for a living room setup.
I know, I'm just saying, this is like college stuff when I was doing radio, just cheap quilts. So fluffier, dense, but a little fluffiness is kind of perfect. And the thicker is going to do better. Moving on to Brad's question. Brad is using a pair of Klipsch Reference 2 5650W2 in-wall speakers. Why is there 2 in that model name?
Because they have to let you know that it's a reference to series. So.
God.
In Roman numerals, no less. Yeah,
why do they do it? So he has these clips as his side surrounds. They are directly 90 degrees to the sides and 8 feet to either side of the main listening position. They are a little bit elevated. He's wondering if he should rotate them 180 degrees so that their tweeters are on the bottom instead of the top. They are mounted high enough in the walls that the tweeters would still have a clear line of sight to every listener seated on the couch. So would that small change give him better response with the tweeters slightly closer to seated ear level? Now, I know that just slightly behind you and slightly above you is pretty much good old Dolby 5.1,
Yeah, back in the good old days before they changed all their diagrams and messed everybody's thinking up and gave everybody FOMO.
Yeah, exactly. Now everybody's all worried that I want to put the tweeter centered directly to my ear holes. I want a laser to come out of the speaker and go right into my brain. So what is that going to make any difference, Rob? My guess is
so you can guess what Tom's answer would be.
And don't you dare go through the trouble?
Yeah, my answer is going to be much closer to Tom's. I wouldn't bother doing this. I wouldn't even bother. Now, look, the easy answer for me to give you is this is non-destructive and costs nothing. You don't even have to unclip the speaker wires. If you want to give it a try, go ahead, undo the screw on the dog legs, turn it over 180 degrees, put it back in and give it a try.
Why not?
Not hurting anything, doesn't cost any money. If you got a little bit of time to kill, then you could certainly try this and see for yourself. I suppose if you really wanted to go whole hog and you've already used some kind of room correction program, technically you should run it again.
Yeah, I guess so.
Which is why I wouldn't bother doing this at all. Because, first of all, listening to clipped horn-loaded speakers directly bang on axis, not my favorite thing in the world. I want to be a little bit off axis from those speakers. The horn makes it so that within a certain slice of the cone, they have really even dispersion. So the chances that this is going to make an audible difference are really, really low, in my opinion. That's why I wouldn't really bother with it. This is not going to be unlocking the last grain of performance that has been missing until now, is turning your side surround speakers upside down, your clipped horn-loaded speakers. This ain't it.
No, you're more likely to get like an interesting placebo effect on this than anything else. And but if you turned them upside down and you got happier, knock yourself out.
Yeah, it doesn't cost any money. I have no problem with you doing it if you want to.
If you've got the time and don't mind running the room correction and running it back again when you flip it back over,
that's right.
It's not going to hurt anything. Yeah. But yeah, the chances of a true gain on this are pretty slim. Let's go on to John. John last week told us about the lip sync issues he's been having. He's using a JBL Synthesis SDP58 Pre-Pro connected to a MadVR NV Extreme, and that's feeding his JVC NZ9 projector.
It's a very nice equipment.
No kidding. The lip sync from his Kaleidoscape player is perfect, but his Apple TV 4K's lip sync was all over the place and drastically different from app to app. Do you know on YouTube TV, broadcast channels in my area have a lip sync problem, but not cable channels?
Uh-huh.
Who do I strangle for that?
Right. Yeah.
John started by simply changing the Apple TV 4K's chroma output setting to 420, as Rob suggested. Sadly, that didn't fix things, so it's not the panacea, right? No. 420 doesn't always fix everything. So then he began the troubleshooting process that Joe suggested last week, and as soon as the MadVR was out of the signal chain, the lip sync from his Apple TV 4K looked good. So he can plug his Apple TV 4K into his JBL Synthesis Pre-Pro and feed the Pre-Pro straight to his JVC projector, and the lip sync seems to be fine that way. He tried adjusting the lip sync settings that are available in the MadVR, but those didn't seem to help at all. The only problem is he thinks the image looks so much worse without the MadVR's processing. Horrible, he says. Horrible without the MadVR.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So, any thoughts on what he could possibly do next? Get used to it? No, that's not fair. He's not going to be happy. But what could we possibly try next? Because clearly something's happening in that MadVR. Why would it happen in the MadVR in this situation?
I mean, it might be applying a fair amount of processing, which would be delaying the video signal relative to the audio. And like I was mentioning, because that Apple TV is trying to look through 3 devices that can all process the video signal, because the Pre-Pro can, the MadVR obviously can, and then the JVC can as well. I think I was right that it's basically not knowing which one to clock to and having some issues that way. I don't have a great solution here. I mean, one thing you could try is try plugging things in as normally with the MadVR in the signal chain, and then try turning off MadVR processing features one by one. You might come upon a compromise between image quality that you like. Now, look, here's the thing. The NZ9 is so good at video processing itself, with its own built-in frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, and it's capable of being very, very accurate, that the only conclusion I can draw is that you are applying enhancements that the MadVR allows you to do that are not technically accurate to the signal, but you happen to like them. Now, that's fine. That would be one of the main reasons to pay all that money for a MadVR. But the idea that it looks horrible when it's plugged straight into the JVC, I mean, I'm sure he was exaggerating for effect.
Let's hope,
But in all honesty, it should actually be more accurate to the original signal without the MadVR in there, because the JVC NZ9 is no slouch in its video processing, including its HDR processing on a frame-by-frame basis. So, Lee kind of said it tongue-in-cheek, but the notion of maybe you kind of get used to the way it looks, and that's actually the more accurate image. But look, you paid all the money for the MadVR. You want all its bells and whistles. So you could try my suggestion one by one. You start turning off MadVR features, and maybe you find a compromise that works for you. Maybe there's one particular processing feature it's applying that's doing the lion's share of messing up the lip sync, and it'll be acceptable compromise to you to have that one feature gone in order to get the lip sync much better. And then you still have some of the enhancements being applied by the MadVR. That would be my first choice, because that's the least expensive. The only other thing I can possibly think of that might work is one of the higher-end HD Fury devices that lets you completely lock the EDID. You'd be plugging the Apple TV 4K directly into that so that it never sees any other EDID information, and then the HD Fury basically acts as a dedicated EDID lock for your Apple TV 4K only, and then feeds that signal through the rest of the signal chain. It might get things working, but I make no promises that that would even fix everything. But yeah, it'd be one of the higher end ones. I mean, it'd be like the 8K Doctor HDMI, or maybe the Vroom. The Vroom would. I mean, you obviously don't mind spending money, so maybe you get a Vroom anyway and give it a try.
I mean, maybe there's even more processing that he loves in that one, and it solves the lip sync problem. So he could try that. Try that. I don't want to tell somebody, I don't want to, rain on a parade where somebody's really enjoying processing. It's okay. Again, I feel like I want to say, if you apply any kind of processing, even if it's just goosing the bass on your subwoofers, or you like some video effect, or you just like, it's okay to like things.
Absolutely.
And when we say something is not accurate, that's not saying that there's something wrong with you, you and your preferences.
I found out a little bit humorous that is like, it's horrible without the MadVR. I'm like,
I don't know about horrible.
I don't know about horrible,
Just not what you're used to, and you like an effect. That's okay.
I wouldn't be shocked if there's literally one particular processing enhancement that is responsible for the lion's share of the lip sync problem. So if you can find that probably the most reasonable compromise.
All right, on to Mike. First up, Mike wanted to let us know that he went ahead and bought the 32-inch LG Ultra Gear OLED computer monitor that we recommended to him. It wasn't cheap, but it does have the image quality that he said he wanted with perfect black levels. So he feels it was worth every penny.
Hooray!
So now, hooray! That's another successful recommendation. I'm fearful of OLED for computer monitor for burn-in, although it would look gorgeous.
If you're careful, if you do
I know,
set it
but
correctly and you're careful.
The last thing I need is another thing to worry about, you know, like for my brain. So because I often like to just leave the computer on and walk away for a while and come back 2 hours later when creativity strikes, and I wouldn't want to have to think about it, but it would love the look, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So now he is considering upgrading his 65-inch LG C8 OLED. He sits 6.5 feet from eyes to screen, and he wouldn't mind a larger field of view. So he was mainly considering either a 77-inch LG G4 OLED or a 77-inch Sony A95L QD OLED. But then the announcement about Panasonic returning to the North American market happened. and he really, really wants the absolute best picture quality that he can get. He did note that the largest OLED screen size from Panasonic in North America is only 65 inches, not 77. But is it so much better that he might actually be worth it might actually be worth sticking with the same screen size that he has now? What about maybe waiting to see if Panasonic releases a 77-inch OLED model next year? Oh boy. I mean, my first reaction is OLEDs are so good. LG OLEDs are so good. A G OLED and bigger is usually better if that's what you're after. You want the wider angle. I wouldn't want to wait.
No, the Panasonics are not that much better. That this is worth it in this case. Get the bigger screen size, because I'm right there with you. I sit about 6.5 feet, and I wanted that 77-inch, 75-inch type screen size is just right. No, do that, because it's not. You're not taking any gigantic step back. Now, between the LG G4 and the Sony A95L, which one should you get? And here, I'm going to say, are you a high-end gamer? Because if you're a high-end gamer, get the LG. It is flat out better for gaming. If that is a priority for you, it is a little tiny step back for movie performance. Objectively speaking, there are tiny little differences, and it's a little tiny step back. It's not a big step back. If it's the only OLED you were seeing, you're not going to notice anything wrong with the image of movies on your LG G4. It's gorgeous.
It's not going to be horrible.
No. But it is just flat out better for gaming. So if gaming is a big priority for you, get the G4. You will never regret that. But if you're like, I barely play games or I don't play games at all, then I would say to you, go ahead and get that Sony A95L QD OLED. The thing that the Panasonic OLEDs have done better than any other WOLED LG display-based panels, because that's what they use. They use the LG display WOLED panels in the Panasonics. And Panasonic went in there and they really fiddled with the just above black information. So where the LG G4 OLED in the first 1 and 2 levels just above black kind of crushes them just down to black. The Panasonics don't do that. And that's what they love. That's what the purists love about the Panasonic OLEDs. They're like,
I would probably like it.
Yeah. And they did. But the Sony QD OLEDs based on the Samsung display Quantum Dot OLED panels, they also do that. And that's why they win the King of TV shootout every year, the Sony QD OLEDs, because they're basically right up there with the Panasonics for objective movie perfection. They look just like a Sony 30-inch mastering monitor. Yeah, that's the one to get if it's all about movies. But I will tell you flat out the G4 is better for gaming. So I think that makes the decision for you.
Yeah, I think so too. I would not wait. Go ahead and get the bigger one. So he puts his TV on a media cabinet stand. He doesn't have any intention to wall mount his new OLED TV. So does the 77-inch LG G4 come with a stand or only a wall mount in the box? What about the Sony A95L? And if he needs to buy a separate stand, which one would we recommend?
Yeah, so, that's because in the G3 series, they only came with the wall mount. None of the G3 series came with a tabletop stand in the box. You could optionally buy a stand for it. It was overpriced. On the G4s, on the G4 series, they split it. The 55-inch and the 65-inch come with a tabletop stand. The 77 and the 83 come with only the wall mount. So in your case, if you got the 77-inch LG G4, you would need to separately buy a tabletop stand. LG still has their official one. It swivels and it wobbles and it's overpriced. So I wouldn't get it.
Don't get that.
The Sony A95L does come with tabletop stand included. The only reason I might replace it is if you want height adjustability or the ability to swivel or something like that. So I do like recommending the Pearl Smith universal TV stands. You can get them at Amazon. They are not overly expensive. They have whatever type of weight limit that you might need. They have swiveling or non-swiveling, but they're height adjustable, which I really like. So if you are putting a center speaker below your TV on top of the stand, they give you that latitude, because all the TV stands that are included in the box, there's maybe you can fit a 2.5-inch tall sound bar under there, but anything else is going to block the bottom of the image. So the Pearl Smith stands are great. They look nice. They don't look out of place even with these high-end TVs. They're stable. They're solid, and you can get them right from Amazon.
Yeah, I understand wanting to put it on a stand. That's our situation, and it just would not be worth it to wall mount it a few inches higher than it is right now. Wouldn't help at all. All right, moving on to Henry. Henry had himself a bit of a realization when he recently checked the hours of usage on his JVC NP5 projector's lamp. If he thinks back across the last 6 to 10 years, he can trace his path of upgrades. He had an Epson 5020 projector that got upgraded to a 5040 UB. Then he swapped that out for a JVC NX5, which was then upgraded to his current NP5. Wow. He upgrades more than I do. He's upgraded AV receivers more than once, and he's done some speaker upgrades too. Right now, he's on a kick of tweaking the acoustic treatments in his room, and he knows he's spent a ton of time reading about home theater, chatting about home theater, and tweaking his home theater. You know what? Respect. It's fun. I get it. But he recalls that when he sold his NX5 projector, it only had about 500 hours of use on its lamp, which was never replaced. And now, about a year into owning his NP5, he recently checked and there's only about 100 hours on it. So there isn't much question that he's spent a lot more time in the pursuit of home theater perfection for what his budget allows versus the amount of time he's actually spent watching or listening to anything in that same home theater. This is like me complaining about how much I watch Netflix menu.
Right, yes.
Other than actual
scrolling
show.
through the
right,
options.
Just scrolling and then I get frustrated and do something else. He's always in there tweaking something, but how often is he actually just sitting down enjoying it? This is a real phenomenon. Is he alone in being like this? No.
No.
Do other AVRant listeners find themselves in the exact same boat, constantly upgrading and tweaking and thinking about what they'll change next, but not actually spending all that much time just sitting down and watching something? My man, this is a problem going way back with all technology. Right. I remember back in the early 90s, I worked at a store in the mall, and there was this one fellow that would come in all the time, and he'd want to talk to us about the very latest thing that was coming out, which at the time was like, a 5600 baud modem. No, 56. No, it was what would have been back then? Could have been a
3800.
Yeah, well, it would have been something like that. Anyway, and I remember teasing him one time, finally going, what do you do with your computer? What do you watch on your home theater? At some point, stop and enjoy some movies because you know you've got a good setup.
But it could be better, Lee. It could be better.
Everything in the world could be better. Everything could be better. But at some point, you do have to live. You know, live, laugh, and love in there somewhere. Stop and smell a rose. Touch grass. Take a break. Watch the movie on what you've spent so much effort putting together.
But Henry, we are your people. I'm sure that's why he wrote to us. We are your people. I guarantee without anybody having to actually respond directly to this from our audience. Right. I know you are not alone. I know you can find anybody who's listening to this podcast is pretty much close to being in the same boat. Also, think about any of the high-end industry people, CEOs that we've interviewed on this podcast, or you've heard interviews on other podcasts, and that's why we always make a point of asking them what is in their own home theater, and it's always hilarious how it's like, do as we say, not as we do, or they've got all the gear list of the world, and it's like what they've got at home is it's always under construction. Yeah. It's never even the highest end stuff. Right. And it's like when we talked to Todd Welty, who is an absolute research expert in the field, and he's like, at the moment I'm using a soundbar because I had 10 seconds to set up what I'm watching. And it's like, that was that's what I had time to set up. It's like, that's what happens to everybody. We think about this stuff. We research it. We talk about it. We do a 2-hour podcast every week about it. And then the actual amount of time, that's why I make myself do the What We Watch segment so that I watch at least one movie every week in my stupid home theater that I spend so much time and money on. Yeah. It's not
stupid
alone,
old
Henry.
Home theater.
Well, it's ridiculous. I mean, I like laughing at it because it's a ridiculous thing to have spent so much time and money on, but that's the fun of it. Look, there is nothing wrong with what you actually enjoy most about your home theater is not watching movies and TV in it. What you actually enjoy most about your home theater is tinkering with it. Yeah. Or thinking about it.
That's
or
the thing. Just be honest with yourself about whatever interest you have.
Yeah.
I used to be like that with computers a lot more, and I finally calmed down and decided maybe I should actually do something with the computer. Yeah. So I understand the feeling, but it's okay.
But how many car gearheads are out there who think about, talk about, tinker with the car that's been in their garage for how many years and how much time have they actually spent driving that car?
Right.
Like
every
for real,
3
right?
weeks for an hour.
Yeah. And there's the flip side, right? There's like the race car drivers. They drive and drive and drive. They have no idea how to change a tire. Like, there's this weird thing that goes on where you think that if you're super into one side of whatever activity or hobby or profession, that you'd be into all sides of it, but that's not really the case. Henry, there's nothing wrong with what you love about home theater is thinking about it, talking about it, reading about it, tinkering with it, listening to test tones and pink noise and sweeps like I do, because I've probably listened to more sweeps than I have watched movies. That's not actually true, but like it's kind of getting there. Like there's nothing wrong with that. That's what you love and are good at, and you've gotten enjoyment out of it. I have no doubt that you've gotten enjoyment out of that side of home theater. The fact that ostensibly what it's all about is putting it all together to watch a movie, it's like, you've watched movies in there. You put 100 hours in 1 year on your projector. You've watched movies in there. But yeah, you spent more time thinking about it and having fun on the putting it together side. Okay. Nothing wrong with that.
I've had to recently admit through being a pinch hitter on this podcast, I've had to admit that I just love watching very specific niche content on YouTube. And I just cannot claim to be I'm not a movie guy very much anymore. I still really appreciate high picture quality. And there are some people on YouTube going through a lot of effort, doing real 4K HDR in some cases, and just in other cases, tweaking it to perfection, getting their lighting just right. And especially if I'm watching like a camera channel or, something about the equipment, which I do. So it's okay. I somehow I feel, and maybe he feels this way. Like, I feel like I'm supposed to be more into movies. Like I feel like I'm a bad home theater podcast person because I'm not, I don't have a lot to tell you about movies. I don't know actor names. I don't remember movies after I watch them, but I love high picture quality. I love people tweaking and taking care.
You're more of a tech head than a movie aficionado. That's
bit more,
fine.
yeah.
And look, there are movie aficionados who have no idea how to put together a home theater. So we need each other. We need each other.
That's very, very true. So it's okay. So yes, man, you are not alone, Henry. You are not alone.
So we are not going to get through David A's question this week, but I think we can hit David B's because it's really quick, and that'll be it for this week. David A, you are up first next week.
All right. And then sometime in the future, center speaker options for Lee, which will it'll really be all three across the front options.
That's right. It's a front three. It's a left, center, right.
It's a left, center, right. Me just beginning my pondering for the future. So look forward to that in the future. So David B's question coming before David A. We will get to David A. David B, what's our favorite 2-channel amp to recommend for expanding a Denon X4300H receiver's 9 built-in amps to the full 11-channel configuration that it can process? He's using SVS Prime elevation speakers that are about 12 feet from the main listening position. And here comes a really affordable option.
Yeah, and this is why Tom and I both love it. It is Fosse. That's the name brand. The model number is, all they literally did was take the built-in amplification and DAC chip that's in there, and they used that as the model number.
Fair enough.
It is the TDA 7498E, but we'll have the link to take you directly to it in case you don't remember that string of letters and numbers. But yes, $80 on Amazon. It's actually on sale, I think, sometimes down to like $60 once in a while, but $80 is like the going price that you'll find. The Fosse TDA 7498E. We've recommended it many times. We've had lots and lots of great feedback about it. It's very simple. Left and right RCA inputs, a pair of binding posts on the back, and on and off switch on the front, and a power cable to plug into it. It is small. It's Class D. It runs efficiently, and it's a genuine 80 watts per channel into 8 ohms, and it genuinely doubles down to 160 watts into 4 ohms. It is linear as the day is long. It'll have no problem driving your prime elevation speakers to as loud as you could possibly need from 4 meters away. It's the perfect solution.
There you go. A little box that does what you need.
For not breaking the bank.
That was an easy, quick question. Yes,
that's why I knew we could do it. We went over 2 hours. What the heck happened? But I do need to get going. So yeah, there it is. I'll scroll back up to the top to thank our listeners of the week one more time before we head out of here. So long list of folks who donated via PayPal, and huge thank yous from Tom to all of you and anybody that we might have missed that came in here, because that is not out of the realm of possibility. But we know that Ilongo, Jeff, James, Graham, Raph, Daniel, Peter, Kevin, Charles, and Graham, a different Graham, with a different spelling. Yes, thank you so much for supporting Tom. He really needs, he's going to need more. Milton
He's going to need it. As we sit here recording, tomorrow is going to be a terrible day for Tom and everybody in Florida. Golly. So, ouch. And let's just hope this thing gets sheared off and weak into this
fingers
hurricane.
Crossed that somehow makes it through it with the minimum amount of damage that we can possibly hope for. But huge thank you to all those folks for donating via PayPal. There's also patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thanks to our 133 patrons. Sherwin and Daniel, thank you for being 2 of them. Henry, thank you for offering to send Tom a Panasonic UB450 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. He's going to need it, but hang on to it for him, please. There's nowhere to send it right now. And Jim, thank you for sending Tom another movie code that he'll be able to enjoy at some point. He's going to have a lovely backlog of things he can enjoy for no additional money, because he doesn't need to spend any more than what he's going to be forced to. And then, yes, notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through whatever might be thrown our way. Sherwin, Jonathan, Stan, Henry, James, Alongo, a different Henry, Carl, Infinite Gary, Graham, David A, David B, Donald. Thank you all so much for sending those in. Everybody who's sent in comments in ways that I didn't collect, if it was YouTube comments or Facebook posts or social media posts, whatever it might be. A huge thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. Not the least of which, thank you, Lee, for being here. You will be back multiple times as all of this goes on, so we'll get to those center speaker things one of these days, the left, center, rights. It'll be on the list one day.
Okay. Hey, I'm just happy to be here, having a lovely day as I look outside to the beautiful weather. Right now, I'm having fun. I have fun every time I'm here with you guys, so no problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Yes, more than ever, we realize what's important, and staying safe and taking things day by day and appreciating the good days when they come along. So that is a nice reminder. That's the silver lining in all of this. We'll say it that way.
Very much so.
I will say, on behalf of Tom Andry, this has been AV Rant. I am Rob H.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.